Hey there, welcome to Bedtime Chills. Tonight, let the sound of rain and distant thunder guide you through 3 hours of haunting horror stories. These tales aren't just eerie, they stay with you. If you feel the chill, hit like, share with someone brave, and subscribe to join the night. Tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. Now, settle in and let the darkness whisper. My father told me a story once. I'll never forget it for a few reasons. I think it's the first story he ever told me as a child. It's also the story of how my grandfather died. But honestly, that's not the reason it stuck with me. You hear stories on TV, or sometimes you overhear something in a public place. People talk about ghosts and aliens, and you think to yourself, that ain't real. They're making it up, or they're mistaken, or they're crazy, or something like that. You just can't believe it. That is, until something happens, something that brings it all together, connects the dots in a way you hadn't considered before. Maybe it happens to you. Or maybe you hear the same story again and again, from different people. It doesn't take long for the world to start feeling a whole lot bigger than you thought it was. As I said, this is a story my father told me. But I never believed it, even though he swore up and down it was true. It wasn't until I started clicking around the internet that I started to believe. I started hearing other stories just like the one my father told me. It didn't take me long after that. That's not what my father called it, of course. He's never used the internet in his life. He wouldn't know what the online community had taken to calling it. When he chose to call it something other than it or that thing, he called it a skinwalker, after an old Cherokee tale his grandfather told him. But I'll tell you the story, the way he told it to me. We were out hunting one night, in the woods surrounding the dairy farm in Ohio where we lived at the time, he'd tell me. We were tracking coyotes. We'd kill them for $50 a skin. They'd kill calves sometimes. We'd do it every night because we needed the money. Sometimes, while we were out, we'd come across a deer and kill it. Our landlord didn't mind, and it could feed our family for a few nights and save us some money. Anyway, we were done making our rounds and heading home, walking, because we didn't have a car or four-wheeler back then. We cut through the woods. That's when we came upon it. Blood everywhere. Splattered on the trees, in the grass, in the creek, everywhere. At first, we figured it was a pack of coyotes. We'd seen how, sometimes, when they couldn't scavenge for whatever reason, they'd start hunting deer or cattle out of desperation. The worst was when they bred with feral dogs. But this wasn't like that. You see, when a pack of dogs, wolves, or coyotes attacks something, they do it right. They'll pick off one that's weak, sick, or old, or just small. They'll hunt it, drive it into a corner, someplace it can't get out of, and they'll run it right to the biggest one, the alpha. And that deer will never see that alpha. It might hear it, but it won't see it. All of a sudden, its throat will be torn out, and it'll drop dead. It's quick, and it's clean. That wasn't what happened here. Something had come upon a group of deer. Coyotes won't attack a group. Wolves wouldn't either, they'd get too much of a fight. There were 3, I think. 3 bodies, just torn apart. You'd see a head or a torso here, a leg there. Predators don't do that. They don't leave scraps behind. Whatever had done this hadn't done it for food, it had done it for fun. But we didn't know that at the time, of course. We just saw a bunch of carcasses and figured it was something we had to take care of. I remember my dad telling me to go home, that he thought it was the work of a pack of feral dogs. But I wasn't leaving him, and I sure wasn't hiking through 2 miles of woods alone, in the dark, with nothing but a .22 and a pocket knife. I was only 13 at the time, so a .22 rifle was the only gun I could reliably use. Dad had the shotgun, and I wasn't going anywhere without it, or him. It took me a while to convince him, but finally we began tracking whatever did that. It wasn't hard either, we just followed the blood. Either that thing bled a deer before it got away, or it dragged one for a mile. I don't know. What I do know is that I'd never seen my dad scared before that night. We started hearing the most horrible sounds. Now, I've been in a lot of woods in my life, and I've been all over the world, but I ain't never heard noises like I heard that night. I heard things screaming. I heard deer, foxes, rabbits, raccoons, and birds, all of them afraid of something and hightailing it. Keep in mind, this is maybe 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Except for the fox and some birds, nothing was supposed to be awake at that hour. But they weren't just awake, mind you. They were on the run. That night, I saw flocks of birds flying straight into trees trying to escape something. We came upon a pack of coyotes and nearly shot a couple, thinking they had their eyes on us, but then we saw they were running in from something, not toward us. They didn't even notice us, they just bolted right past. Then some deer did the same. Then rabbits, squirrels, and foxes. Even a couple of wild hogs. These critters were supposed to be hunting each other, and the only thing they cared about was getting as far away from there as possible. We should have put 2 and 2 together, that maybe whatever we were tracking wasn't something we were supposed to see, and wasn't something we could kill. To this day, I don't know why we didn't just go home. I guess we were curious. I think that was my dad's nature, to go toward trouble, to fight. And being aware of the things my father did during the war, I figured it was best to stay by his side. We finally reached an open valley. It was normally a soy field, but it wasn't in season, so it was just flat dirt. That's when we saw the tracks. Animals fleeing the forest had leveled everything in their path. But where that deer blood was, nothing had taken a single step. It was like whatever was responsible had left it for us to find. The tracks were shallow. Whatever it was couldn't have weighed more than 100 pounds, but that didn't mean much. A bobcat weighing 40 pounds soaking wet can tear out your throat if you ain't careful. The fact this thing was on the lighter side just meant it was probably quick and was going to be tough to hit. So we followed the tracks, and it didn't take us long to find where they led. There's an old schoolhouse that sits on the top of a hill. Half of it had been ripped out by a tornado, but nobody lived there, not for a long time. Sometimes we caught homeless people in there, or substance addicts looking for a safe place to shoot up. We figured maybe that was it. Maybe it was some sick kid riding a high. But we didn't think that for long. When we got within 50 yards, we heard a noise. A sort of screech made up of 2 different sounds. One was high-pitched, and another was a low growl. It was making both sounds at the same time, if that makes any sense. We approached to within 20 yards, and we heard another sound, different this time. I remember thinking that it sounded like paper being torn apart while someone was swinging water back and forth in a bucket. Dad looked at me, knelt down, and whispered. He told me I had to stay behind him because we were about to corner our prey. Any animal will fight when it's cornered, especially a predator. But we could tell by the tracks that there was only one. He told me it was probably a single feral dog, most likely rabid. The plan, he said, was to sneak up on it while it was eating, shoot it, and then keep shooting until it didn't move anymore, then slit its throat. And if it got to Dad, it was my job to shoot or stab it to get it off him. So he walked up, with me right behind him, just a tad to his side so I could see what it was. I wish to this day I hadn't. It was leaning over a carcass, tearing off its flesh, and throwing aside what it didn't nibble on. There was blood all over the brick, glistening in the moonlight. It was pale white and looked a little like a man, but not quite human. It had arms and legs like ours, but it sat like a monkey, hunched over. And its hands weren't normal, it had long fingers with claws at the ends. So we saw that, and my dad hesitated. He wasn't about to fire at a person. So he cleared his throat to try and get it to turn around. I swear to God Almighty, all the noise just ceased in an instant. I ain't ever heard true silence before that, and never again afterward. But for 2 seconds, nothing made any noise. And I mean nothing. This made it all the louder when that thing turned around, made this shrill cry, and pounced on Dad. He got a shot off. I think he missed. If he hit it, it didn't faze the thing at all. But it was on him, tearing entire parts of him off. I started shooting it with the .22, point blank, but the thing barely bled at all. I got off 5 rounds, and then I started hitting it with the butt of the gun. It didn't budge, or even register that I was there. It was clawing at my dad, removing whole chunks of his flesh. It started on his torso, peeling off the skin on his chest, and then it moved up. It tore out his throat, ripped his nose clean off, and gouged out his eyes. Then it scalped him and started digging in. I stood there, helpless, as it ripped off the bottom half of his jaw, the little bones and that tube in his neck, and then his ribs. I don't exactly remember what happened, but somehow my dad's knife ended up in this thing's shoulder, and my dad, what was left of him, that is, ended up on my back. I was running, and by God, I was going faster than I'd ever run before or after. And it was following me. I ended up back in the forest, opposite the woods we started in. I was heading toward my landlord's house, because it was the closest thing to help nearby. But even that was half a mile away. All the while, I could hear the thing screeching and moaning. I heard branches cracking and being thrown around. It was cracking so loud and so often, it sounded like someone was taking an axe to every single tree I passed. But I never looked back, not once. The thought didn't even cross my mind. Finally, I tripped and fell into some gravel. I looked up to see my landlord and a bunch of his buddies drinking around a campfire. I screamed and cried, and they came over. I told them to call an ambulance, and my landlord looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "What is that on your back?" he asked me. Just as the words left his mouth, it dawned on him, without me saying a word. It was one of those awful flannel shirts my dad wore everywhere, he realized. And it was nearly all that was left of my dad. Aside from a bit of his head and torso, that's all there was. Absolutely nothing below the waist. Suddenly, we heard it. The screeching. My landlord grabbed me, causing me to drop what was left of Dad on the ground. And I was fighting him, crying, because I thought we could still save him, somehow. But the truth is, my dad had been gone well before I ever picked him up, and all I'd done was carry a corpse back home. My landlord had to pick me up and throw me inside before I would go with him. He and his buddies, all of us, went inside together. They locked the doors and grabbed their guns. The landlord asked me, "What happened? What happened?" But I didn't know what to tell him. He pieced enough of it together to understand there was something dangerous out there. All the lights in the house were on, and someone called the cops. They said they'd get there as soon as they could, but that meant in 15 minutes. We looked outside and saw it walk in front of the fire they'd made. No one knew what it was. One of them said it looked like an ape. Suddenly, something came crashing through the window. We all fired at it, but quickly realized it wasn't the thing. No. It was my landlord's dog. Well, his body, anyway. His head and legs were missing. We had just started pushing things in front of doors and windows to form a barricade when we heard something in the garage. I remember one of his friends saying the doors were open. We heard metal and glass being ripped and smashed. We dragged the couch and TV in front of the door to the garage, for added measure. It banged around some more, but then it got quiet. Not silent, like it was before. We could hear it move around a bit, and the guys were talking, making sure their guns were ready. Someone handed me a pistol. No sooner had I cocked the hammer back when we heard something shatter upstairs. Then we heard it screech again, except this time it was louder, and it didn't echo and fade out. Because it was inside. We all rushed to the one door that led upstairs, and we got to it just as that thing did. It opened just a bit, and 4 or 5 men slammed into it. It managed to get its hand through. Someone with a shotgun took care of that, put the barrel right up to its wrist and pulled the trigger. Blew its hand clean off. That only made it angrier. It started shoving that door, clawing. We were on one side, pushing as best we could, and it was on the other, doing the same. The wood wasn't going to hold, so someone told us to keep our heads down. Suddenly, the top half of the door was gone, and my ears were ringing. There were splinters everywhere. 2 or 3 of them had just unloaded on the top of the door. I don't really know where it went after that. The police got there. I was still glued to what was left of the door. The sun was up before they pried me loose. They put me in a hospital for a while. While I was there, a whole lot of people talked to me, but I didn't respond. Not for a long, long time. When I got back home, I got a job for the landlord, working on the farm. We didn't talk much, not about the thing. But I signed up for the army when I was 19, and he sat me down to drink some scotch as a send-off. I asked him right away what the police told him. The story they went with was that it was a wild animal, probably a wolf, or maybe a bear that had migrated north. I asked him how they could say that when they had the hand. He looked at me, stunned. He told me the hand never made it back to the station. The cop who had it in his car got into a wreck. Drove into a tree and died on impact. The hand was never found, likely taken by an animal. The cops, when they would acknowledge the hand existed at all, said it was simply the paw of a bear that resembled a man's. I never talked to the landlord again. He went missing while I was in basic training, and no one ever saw him again. There were rumors that he owed some people money and skipped town, but I don't think it's that simple. As for me, I never went back to those woods. I wouldn't even if I had the entire U.S. Army at my back. That was the extent of what my father told me about the incident in the woods. There's just one problem, however, my father lied. When my mother died, I don't think my father felt he had anything left, and that he might as well settle old scores. He returned to the woods, and he never came back either. The FBI was called, and they put on a show for everyone involved, but I knew they were really looking. I had to get an agent drunk and slip him a few 50s before he finally told me that they get a few calls about those woods every year, about someone up and vanishing. But that was all he wanted to tell me. Before he got up and left with the rest of his team, he wrote the name they'd given the creature on a napkin. Of course, I didn't realize that's what it was at first. It wasn't until I put the words into a search engine online that I understood what they meant. Honestly, I would have rather not known. As it turns out, there are hundreds of stories just like my father's, as well as photos and drawings of the thing. And though the details vary, everyone who has encountered it agrees on one thing: it's still out there, and there isn't a man on earth who can stop it. Paul pulled the envelope out of his leather attaché case and settled into an uncomfortable chair behind a large writing desk. Late afternoon sun filtered in through the bay window but couldn't defeat the dankness of the old house, nor the dreariness of his mood. Luckily, he had the mind to pack a few battery-powered lanterns, and one of them now provided enough illumination to examine his mother's ornate handwriting on the back of the envelope. For Paul, it read. He traced the letters with his fingers, each one written with care and love. Pensively, he squeezed the bridge of his nose and released an exhausted breath. He had admittedly taken the loss of his mother very hard, as she was a kind, bright, thoughtful woman taken well before her time. But he was a lucky man and had married a woman who exuded those same qualities and had been blessed with a daughter whose genes seemingly came from the women in his family. He had received the envelope several weeks earlier at the allocation of his mother's will. Its contents were undoubtedly a letter, most likely full of sage advice and love. He had agonized over opening it, though, as he was unable to come to terms with reading his mother's final words. But his wife, Lauren, had finally convinced him that they might provide comfort rather than sadness. With final resolve, he retrieved a dusty letter opener from the desk and began to read the handwritten letter. To my dearest Paul, there are not enough words in the dictionary to express my love for you, Lauren, and your sweet baby Emily. I only hope that I have shown you that love over your 25 years of life. My health may be fading, but know that I will always be with you, and that I'm sorry for what I'm about to reveal to you. I fear, though, that there isn't enough forgiveness on God's green earth for what I've done. If you are reading this, that means that my final will and testament have been executed, and you are probably surprised to find that you are now the owner of a small farmhouse in Creekside, Pennsylvania. It is the house that I grew up in. Heed my words, Paul, do not go to that house. Put the deed in the back of your safe, claim it as an asset, but otherwise forget that it exists. You may be curious to see the childhood home of your mother, but please do not go to that house. I'm going to tell you why, Paul, and you may not have the same respect for me afterward, but it is imperative that you understand the gravity of the situation. My parents and I moved from that house when I was around 15 to live with Aunt June. However, when I was a few years younger than you are now, fresh out of college, I was offered a teaching position at a school a few towns over from that childhood home. You know, my parents both passed away shortly after we moved to California, and now I'm telling you that they, too, left me that house in their will, but they never provided me with the knowledge I'm about to bestow upon you, my poor, sweet Paul. Out of convenience, I moved into the house several weeks before summer ended. The town hadn't changed much. It was still secluded, surrounded by forest, and its residents were still fairly strange and private. They did remember who I was, though, and they definitely remembered the accident that caused my family to leave. As I was buying some groceries, the woman behind the counter recognized me and told me that I shouldn't have come back. She strongly suggested that I turn around and leave right then and there. She grabbed me by the hand forcefully to express her urgency. There was a scar on her arm, just like the one I bear, the one I told you I got from falling off my bike as a little girl. I was admittedly a little freaked out, but not enough to take her advice. That whole town is a little kooky, and at the time I thought I was being shunned for what happened when I was a teenager. But there was a fearfulness in her tone that has stayed with me all these years. The house had remained untouched for 8 years, and I spent that first day cleaning a thin film of dust off everything. I was exhausted by nightfall, and, feeling that it was awkward to sleep in my parents' old bedroom, I opted for my old one on the first floor. Because my room was small, my bed was flush against the wall, partially covering the only window in its length. A dresser and vanity were against a parallel wall. I remember collapsing into that bed that night, my body aching from moving boxes and cleaning. I'm not sure what initially woke me up that night, Paul. I don't recall a noise that pulled me from slumber, but I was overwhelmed by a feeling that I was not alone. Moonlight through the window cast shadows, but after a quick scan I knew the room was devoid of life, save for me. And then I saw it. In the vanity mirror. A reflection of the window. And looking in through the window was a creature that should not exist. That cannot be from this world. Too horrible for words. Just know, Paul, that this thing was evil. Even in the pale light, you could see the vile intentions in its inky eyes and snarling, fanged mouth. It looked excited. And hungry. its gray hands pressed against the glass, each elongated, alien finger leaving a filmy residue behind as it dragged its claw-like nails down the window. My back was turned to it, my feet only a few inches away from its face, separated by a thin pane of glass. I watched it feverishly watch me through the mirror. Unable to tell if it was aware that I knew it was there, I nonetheless felt like it was waiting for me to move. I, however, was frozen with fear. Honestly, if something by the grace of God hadn't stirred me from my sleep, the sound of its screeching nails would have woken me. I was able to quell a surprise reaction and remain still. Maybe it was minutes, maybe it was hours, but the thing finally left. I'd be lying to you if I told you that was the first time I ever saw it, though. I'm so sorry, Paul. There are 3 creeks that run parallel in the woods surrounding the town, a few miles apart from one another. Of all the rules given to us children of Creekside, the most important was that we were not allowed to pass the second creek, and we were strongly urged not to venture too far past the first one. My parents told me there were old foundations and wells that made it dangerous for kids to play there, and that several children had gone missing in the woods. But it was also apparent that the adults of the town never crossed the second creek either. A few people who had risked getting close to the second creek claimed they had seen ghosts among the trees, and that lore alone was enough to convince us kids to stay close to town. My best friends growing up were Jimmy and Andy. Jimmy, you know, would later become your father, but Andy was always a bit of a daredevil and a troublemaker, and I was an impressionable young girl. One day, Andy had stolen a few of his dad's cigarettes, and the 3 of us went into the woods like a bunch of foolish tough guys to smoke them. Andy got the crazy idea that we needed to rebel even more and explore the woods past the second creek. Jimmy and I were scared. It had been so ingrained in us to never do that, but Andy was persuasive. Andy crossed the ancient-looking bridge over the second creek first, cigarette in mouth. Jimmy and I stayed behind, watching him from the other side. It became clear that Jimmy wasn't going to do it. He threw a rock at Andy, called him an idiot, and started walking up the path toward town. I begged Andy to come back with us, and I must have thrown my head back in frustration when he teased me. That's when I saw it, the gray, gargoyle-like creature. It was perched in a tree, not too far from where Andy was standing. It looked like a vulture eyeing its prey. I had barely started to scream when it leapt from the tree and tackled Andy to the ground. Jimmy ran back to my side, but neither of us had any idea what to do, let alone how to comprehend the fear. I could hear Andy screaming and fighting, and I swear, Paul, that sound has never left my ears. I grabbed a rock and ran across the bridge. I hit the thing over the head, but it swiftly knocked me back into the water. I struggled, but Jimmy pulled me out on the other side just in time to see the creature make off with Andy's limp body through the trees. I don't know how long Jimmy and I sat there in shock, but the stars were out when we reached my house. We told our worried parents and the other adults who had gathered there what had happened. All of them seemed more shocked that Andy and I had crossed the creek than by our descriptions of the creature. Jimmy's mom let out a cry of relief when she realized her boy had not crossed, but my parents started packing up loose belongings and clothing hastily. We left town that night and drove the whole way to Aunt June's, only stopping once, outside of Chicago. My parents died only 6 months later from a disease that doctors couldn't identify. I was young and didn't understand. Everything was a blur, and I couldn't discern one emotion or memory from another. At some point, I started believing that Andy had fallen in the creek and hit his head on a rock, and that my parents' passing was an awful coincidence. It was easier to cope that way. And then I saw that hideous face in the window, like it had claimed me nearly a decade before and had been waiting for me ever since. I was relieved when it left, but fearful, for I did not know where it had gone. I remained frozen the rest of the night. Early the next morning, a knock came at the front door. I hesitated, gripped again by fear, but it was Jimmy. A nostalgic reunion was halted by his urgency to discuss something with me. I knew what it was before he even sat at the kitchen table. I wasn't prepared for what he was about to tell me, though, Paul. I'll spare you the details and tell you only what you need to know. This thing that lives in the woods has been there for a very long time, Jimmy says, far before the original settlement of Creekside. Nobody knows exactly where it came from or much else about it, only that it was responsible for the vicious deaths of many of the town's children. It likes young blood, Jimmy told me. Nobody could figure out a way to kill it either. But the thing was conniving and sentient, and realized that if the people left, its food would too. On the other hand, the townspeople feared that wherever they went, the creature would follow. So a deal had been made in blood. Anything that moved between the oval the second and third creeks created belonged to the creature, and in turn, the creature would never harm anything that didn't cross that boundary. Jimmy told me I belonged to the creature because I had crossed the bridge, and my parents had been killed because they betrayed the pact. You see, Paul, it's a curse. I know it's hard to believe. It didn't take me long to decide to leave Creekside again. Jimmy didn't know definitively what geographically bound the creature, but had done enough research to estimate that it only traveled within the confines of Creekside and nearby townships. He had also discovered similar tales of creatures around the world. These things are all over the place, and I'm sorry, Paul. This is not important now. Check the files within your father's study. They'll tell you more than you need to know. Don't delve too deep, though. It was his obsession with it that cost him his life, not the car accident I lied to you about. I'm so sorry. Jimmy helped me throw a few boxes into my car and promised to meet me again soon. I turned around one last time to share a moment of silent solitude with him before I got in my car. As I turned back, I could see terror transform his face. He called my name, but I didn't have time to react. The creature bounded from the woods and leapt to the roof of my car. It crouched, dropping its face to be even with mine. Sneering, its rancid breath smelled of dried blood. My knees weakened and buckled as Jimmy swooped in to tackle the thing off the roof. Jimmy fought with all his might, but wasn't a match and ended up crumpled a few feet away from me. In hysterics, I tried to flee but quickly found I had nowhere to run. The thing caught me promptly and dragged me into the woods with little effort. Jimmy composed himself enough to start running after us, screaming for me to make a deal. I lost consciousness before I could make sense of what Jimmy was telling me, a fleeting memory of Andy whispering in my mind. Paul, please remember how much I love you as you struggle to manage the final parts of my story. A small fire blinded me as I awoke on cold, damp ground, surrounded by trinkets of times gone by. An old wind-up children's toy. A few dog collars. Andy's engraved lighter. Bones were littered everywhere. The creature sat squat across from me, watching me zealously. It was muttering anxiously and rocking on its wolfish feet. I was surprised, as ancient as Jimmy told me this thing was, to find that it spoke English. Spoiled, it said, gravelly. You spoiled. I remember its call as following me as I nervously brought myself to a sitting position. I knew it was you. Too old now. Spoiled. I seemed to be in a cavern of some sort, with two tunnels that faded to blackness, neither discernible as the exit. I haven't forgotten its words, nor the look in its eyes when it stopped rocking. You can't leave. You are mine. You belong to me. You crossed the water. But you are too old to eat. You spoiled. Realizing the thing was contemplating whether to kill me or not, Jimmy's screams strained through my head, and I understood that he had meant for me to make a deal with the creature for my life. The creature liked to bargain. So I asked it, Paul, what it wanted in exchange for letting me go. It thought for a while before it smiled maliciously. It wanted one of my children, and one of my children's children. I wondered if this thing had been around long enough to inspire Rumpelstiltskin. I don't know, Paul, but I took that deal. I nodded my head and agreed that when I had children, I would bring one of them to the creature, and if I had grandchildren, I would sacrifice one of them as well. It might seem like a rough bargain, but it would get two for letting one go. You might be sickened now, Paul, but realize that after considering the offer thoughtfully, I simply intended to never have children. I resolved to give up becoming a mother. I thought I had tricked it. The creature took my hand, cutting its claw deep into my forearm, creating a brand that would bond me for life. Then, it simply let me go. Jimmy, and several others he had gathered, waited at the bridge. None of them asked me how I survived, for they all knew by the scarlet letter on my arm. As you know, Jimmy would leave Creekside and settle with me near Aunt June in California. In good conscience, I couldn't sell the house and put another family in the vicinity of that evil thing. I had become resigned to the fact that I had to abandon the opportunity of motherhood, but could never bring myself to permanently and medically destroy the chance of pregnancy. I just couldn't do it, Paul. And Jimmy and I were careful, even after we married. But several years later, I became pregnant with you. And your twin brother, Andrew. I know that's a shock. I'm not proud of what I did, Paul, and I regret never telling you about your brother. I knew, though, that the creature would take me, as it did my parents, if I betrayed our deal. The scar on my arm burned long before I gave birth to you. I took that baby, Paul, that infant, only a few days old. I took him back to Creekside and left him on the other side of the bridge on the second creek. I am unworthy of forgiveness, and to this day, the memory induces nausea and unbearable heartbreak. It was an evil thing for me to do, but it let me watch you grow up into the man you are. I've given you every ounce of goodness I could. And that's why I'm dying, Paul. I knew Lauren was with child a month before you announced it, because the scar on my arm was on fire, reminding me of my dues. I can't pay them this time. I can't do that to you, or sweet Emily. I have lived my life and only hope that I can be reunited with your father and Andrew on the other side. I fear that my actions have provided for more insidious consequences, however. I will repeat my initial warning, Paul. Do not go to that house in Creekside. Only evil waits there. I can't bear to imagine that the creature is able to reach Emily. Our sweet, sweet Emily. I love you, Paul, with my whole heart. I am so sorry, but do not deserve your forgiveness. Mom. Paul put the letter down on the writing desk. He could distinguish disturbed and disgusted emotions among a primal fear and sadness. He couldn't categorize or understand his thoughts. He was unable to tell if these emotions were targeted toward his mother or himself. His mother had made some awful and anguishing decisions, sure, but he probably should have read the letter before he brought his wife and daughter to this place. Suddenly, his mother's childhood house seemed a little darker. Dazed, he tried desperately to grasp the connotations of his mother's letter. The sound of glass smashing broke his stupor, the sounds of glass shattering, the ferocity of his wife's screams, and the fading wail of his daughter's cries. We had all liked Mr. Winscott. He didn't mind when we used the sledding hill on his property, and he always gave out the best Halloween candy in the neighborhood. So when we heard he'd been taken by the Tall Man, everyone was really bummed out. You wouldn't have heard of Tall Man, so let me explain. Tall Man has been a legend in my town for decades. Those who claim to have seen him say that he is over 9 feet tall, slight, pale, with an exceedingly polite smile. My dad told me that Tall Man is a collector. He likes things. Dad says his favorite things to take are sad people, empty buildings, and dreams. I have to admit, he's stolen away my dreams more than a few times. When Mr. Winscott didn't show up for church on Sunday, nobody thought it was weird. Then, When Monday rolled around and he wasn't at work with my dad, people started to whisper. My parents thought it was odd, but not particularly concerning. But then the rumors started that Tall Man had gotten him. A kid in my class even said he had seen Tall Man in Mr. Winscott's house through a window. I told my parents what Jake had seen, but they only laughed. Tyler and I biked by Mr. Winscott's place every day after school to get to our friend Rory's house. We never stopped in front of Mr. Winscott's to try and see Tall Man through the windows like Jake had. We never even slowed down. But one day, we played too late at Rory's. Since we didn't want to bike home in the dark, we called our parents and asked to sleep over. Tyler was allowed to. I wasn't. I tried really hard not to look as I biked by Mr. Winscott's cul-de-sac. I almost made it, but my curiosity forced a backward glance at the house. The lights were all on, and my eyes were drawn to the face in the window immediately. I saw Tall Man looking back at me. I choked in a panicked breath, and my foot missed the pedal as I tried to speed away on my bike. I stumbled for only a second, my eyes never leaving the face in the window, before pedaling home as fast as I could. The next morning at school, I told Rory and Tyler about Tall Man. They didn't believe me, of course. They hadn't believed Jake either. I knew I had to show them, otherwise they'd think I was a liar. We waited until dark and then biked to Mr. Winscott's cul-de-sac. Tall Man was there, as I told them he'd be, watching us from the window above the front door. It was such a tall front door that I thought Tall Man must have been 10 feet high to see out of the window above it. He was almost smiling, but his expression betrayed a certain displeasure. Tyler fell off his bike. Holy crap! Run! We did. As soon as we cleared the cul-de-sac, we all began talking over each other in a flustered panic. I can't believe we saw Tall Man. Did you see the look on his face? We have to tell the cops. We went back the next morning with more friends, but Tall Man was gone. We went back the next day, but again, we could see no one behind the window. We began to wonder if Tall Man only came out at night. A few nights later, as we sat in Rory's basement waiting for a pizza to arrive, we decided to sneak out and see if our theory was true. We quietly rolled our bikes down the driveway and into the street. We took off for Mr. Winscott's house, torn between hoping Tall Man was there and praying that he wasn't. We saw him as soon as we biked into the cul-de-sac. He was still standing there after all, and this time, he was outright frowning. He's mad, Rory said. He wants us to stay away. I don't get why he only comes out at night, Tyler said while he snapped a picture. Don't, I hissed. Stop taking pictures, you make him madder. Maybe he watches us in the daytime, too, Rory shrugged. Maybe we can only see him at night because that's when the porch light comes on and shines right in the window. It was a chilling thought. We decided to test Rory's theory the following Saturday, emboldened by the assumption that Tall Man could only watch us, but never come out. As soon as the sun came up that morning, we biked to Mr. Winscott's. We had to get close, almost all the way to the beginning of his driveway, but Tyler swore he saw Tall Man still standing in the window. I made hand binoculars and squinted at the window for a few more minutes before Tyler suddenly said, "Let's go," hopped back on his bike, and pedaled off. We caught up to him a few blocks later. What the heck was that? I said. It was. Tall Man was there, but he looked different this time. Like how? Rory asked. I don't know, he looked angry, or just wrong somehow. It was days before we could convince Tyler to go back to Tall Man's house, and even then, he insisted on taking his teenage brother Matt with us. Matt wasn't impressed with our stories at all. He didn't believe us, but he came anyway, for Tyler's sake. As soon as we got close enough to see Tall Man in the window above the door, Matt got off his bike. He stared and squinted, and stared some more. He got closer, closer than we had ever dared to go at night. We followed nervously behind him. Matt walked up the driveway and then down the stone path to the front porch. We dared not follow that far. Then Matt went up the porch stairs, right up to the door. "Holy heck," he said. Then a few more four-letter words. And suddenly Matt was running down the front porch, down the path, down the driveway, and out into the street where we waited. "What is it?" Tyler asked him. "There is no tall man," he said, out of breath. "Call the cops. Now." And he was right. It wasn't tall man after all. We stayed long enough to watch the police break down the door and cut the rotting corpse of Mr. Winscott from the ceiling where he had hung himself from a lamp fixture in his foyer. The body had decayed as if it were melting in the days we had watched it from the road. Mr. Winscott had written no note and made no goodbyes, leaving behind only the sad imprint of a divorced, middle-aged man suffering a sad, well-hidden depression. It was weeks before the town lost interest in the tragic suicide, and months before kids stopped asking us to describe the body in all of its gory detail. Eventually, even Tyler and Rory stopped talking about it. Everyone had moved on. Everyone except me. See, there was one detail that always bothered me, one thing I never told Rory or Tyler. It was about the first time I'd seen Tall Man, the time I'd been alone. The thing was, I'd seen Mr. Winscott that night. He'd been sitting alone in his kitchen eating dinner. But I'd seen something else, too. In the upstairs bedroom window, there had been an impossibly tall, impossibly pale man staring back at me. And he'd been politely smiling. "Speak louder, please." I put my hand up next to my ear from the back of the room, signaling that she needed to raise her voice. She took a deep breath. I could see anxiety turning her cheeks beet red as strands of blonde hair began to fall out of the same unkempt ponytail she wore every day. There was something about her so familiar, but I just couldn't put my finger on it. With her face glued to the paper, too afraid to make eye contact, she quickly sputtered out, "Hi. My name is Paisley Jackson, and this is my poem called My Family." Paisley was a shy little girl. In fact, she was one of the quietest students I'd ever had in my 10 years of teaching. Which, I guess, being the youngest of 11 will do to anyone. Surprisingly, she was very smart, unlike the rest of her siblings, who were dull as a box of rocks. Lord, the Jackson kids were such a headache, except for Paisley, of course. I just wish I could have given her more opportunities to improve her future. Don't get me wrong, I tried to help Paisley. I really did. I gave her clothes, food, and even had funds lined up for her. But living dirt poor in a shack out in the middle of the desert was a tough hand to be dealt in life. Besides, no matter what I did, it wouldn't have made a difference. Everyone knows that the cycle of poverty is almost impossible to break. I crossed my legs, pen in hand, preparing for yet another bland story about a family I'd never get to meet. If you've ever worked with underprivileged kids, you'd know that guardian involvement is quite rare. When it came to interest in their daughter's education, Paisley's parents were no exception. I have 2 mommies. One named Betty who can make good spaghetti. I call her Mom, she's the one that's married to my dad, Tom. One named Claire, with pretty yellow hair. I call her Mommy. Dad calls her his project, his hobby. Being smack dab in the middle of Utah, I've seen hundreds of polygamous families, so this didn't strike me as odd. Besides, even though polygamy is illegal, I try to keep my nose in my own business. Mom takes care of us all. She can do that because she's so tall. Mommy wears a pretty silver bracelet. She wears it because she's so famous. Wouldn't be the first time I saw kids making up stories about celebrity parents to add excitement to their ordinary lives. I just didn't expect it to come from Paisley. Mommy has me and Tommy. He's one of my older brothers. Mom is a lot older. She has all the others. I cringed. That meant one of Paisley's mothers had given birth to 9 children. I couldn't imagine going through that many pregnancies. Dad says me and Tommy are a gift from God. He'll never hit us with a rod. His pride and joy is Tommy. But he says the only person he truly loves is Mommy. I looked up from my grade book, the line about a rod catching my attention. However, this wasn't the first time one of my students had accidentally reported abuse. Truth is, CPS picks and chooses who they want to help. Mom is having another baby. She's mad Dad wants to name it Daisy. Mommy can't have any more kids. Her last one died of SIDS. Shifting in my seat, I scribbled down a note reminding myself to deliver my daughter's old baby clothes to the Jackson shack. As a mother myself, I know babies can be expensive. Dad says she did it on purpose, because she wanted to run off and join the circus. Mom says it wasn't her fault. I promised to keep it secret in the me and her vault. I shook my head in sadness. How could someone blame a grieving mother for something she couldn't control? Mommy was the one Dad chose. He watched all of her school shows. They were joined in the night. Daddy says inside her is a lot of fight. Mom is just a cover. Dad doesn't really love her. I threw my hand up, a gesture meaning stop that I had taught my students, but Paisley didn't look up. She continued to read, oblivious to my disappointed frown. Obviously, one of her siblings had put her up to this as a joke. Mommy says she needs to get out. She wants to show me what life is all about. Dad gets mad, it's his biggest pet peeve. Mommy is sad, she just wants to leave. Mommy sings to me her favorite song. Mom says Dad's head is wired wrong. Shaking my head, I sighed. Another child with so much potential and such a kind heart, stuck in the middle of a lover's quarrel that didn't even involve her. Last birthday, I wanted to take Mommy to see her favorite basketball team. Mom made me a cake with frosted buttercream. I got to go see the Knicks. But Dad said he made a mistake he couldn't fix. Nothing is the same anymore. I don't know why for sure. Now Dad cries at night alone. He asks God, what have I done? To Mom he no longer tends. She hopes the baby will make amends. Paisley raised her head up with a smile, looking for my approval. Although I was appalled at the inappropriateness of her poem, I didn't want to break her spirit. She clearly was very proud of it, and scolding her for something that wasn't her wrongdoing would have just sent that little girl back into the shell I've been trying to break for months. So instead, I clapped, making the rest of the class, who were too young to understand the gravity of the situation, applaud too. Mrs. June, I brought a picture of Mommy for extra credit. It's got one more part of the poem. Can I show the class? I nodded my head, thinking there couldn't possibly be any details worse than what she already shared. Paisley reached into the front pocket on her old, worn-out, hand-me-down dress and pulled out an aging photo. She flipped the flaking picture around, displaying it as if it were her most prized possession. My blood ran cold. I finally figured out why Paisley looked so familiar to me. In what seemed to be a school photograph, smiling ear to ear exactly like Paisley, was a young woman by the name of Claire Daisy. She was a high school student, popular for her ability to land the lead in every school play, who went missing without a trace 12 years prior. She was last seen leaving theater practice late one night, and then she just vanished. No sign of a struggle. No witnesses. No evidence. No body. Nothing. Her case was covered on every news station in Utah for a while because of how peculiar it was, until people lost interest. Paisley happily continued. I was so in shock I couldn't stop her as she read off the back of the picture. There is one thing I don't understand, and maybe you'll have the answer at hand. If Dad's love for Mommy will never sway, why did he treat her that way? Mom lays her head on a nice soft bed, but Mommy sleeps in the basement under a big slab of cement. My grandfather grew up on a chicken farm outside of Krakow, Poland. He passed away a few years ago at the age of 82. A few days before his passing, due to an aggressive form of stomach cancer, he sat me down next to him in his old rocking chair and said in his familiar Polish accent, "After I took the boat to New York, I promised to leave this story behind." He didn't look up as he spoke to me, simply staring into his cup of black coffee. It's been 70 years, and I must tell someone before I meet God. I was born in a small, quaint, empty town, which, despite the Nazi occupation, still functioned. We lived in a 2-bedroom farmhouse, my father, mother, and my brothers, Michael and Igor. I'm sorry you never got to meet any of them. Anyway, Michael and Igor were twins, identical twins, actually, and we had heard rumors of the Nazis' fascination with identical twins. This forced us to be even more reserved, even though we already lived in a secluded part of the countryside in the last occupied house in town. In order to avoid going into the occupied towns, we basically ate only chicken and eggs for every meal, and whatever else Mama could gather from the garden. It was lonely, but we survived. The thing that was most difficult for me was the fact I had to sleep in the basement. Because Michael and Igor were toddlers, they required my father and mother's attention. The basement was cold, with only a small window, and the moonlight was the only light I got. Because of this, I always delayed going down there until I was absolutely exhausted, so I wouldn't have to lie there awake. On the nights that I couldn't manage to sleep, I would look out of the window, which gave me a small view of the garden and the large, abandoned water well. This was my daily activity throughout those lonely, war-torn nights. In general, it was boring and uneventful, but occasionally, I would catch a glimpse of a family, or even just a man, or 2 lovers, sneaking their way through our garden up to our front door. They always looked rushed and frightened, and sometimes wore tattered uniforms. What would follow were horrible sounds of banging and pleadings for whoever lived there to open up, followed by an argument between my father and mother over whether we should let them in. He shifted in the chair to adjust himself. "You see, son, we didn't know it, well, at least I didn't, that we lived fairly close to the Auschwitz concentration camp and that those people were escapees." "Well, did your father let them in?" I asked impatiently. "No," he said. "It would have been a death sentence for them as well as for us. The Nazis didn't like Poles, but they tolerated us, and it was easier to hide Michael or Igor than an entire family. My father did what he had to do in order to keep his family alive. As the war went on, fewer and fewer people began showing up in the middle of the night. That's about the time our chickens and vegetables began to disappear. Losing our only supply of food would not have been tolerable, and at that point, my father suspected it was the escapees. So, he built a fence around our property. Despite this, the chickens continued to disappear. They weren't killed, they were simply gone, just vanished from their cages and pens. One night, I decided to stay up myself in order to see if I could find out the answer. I battled my tiredness until the wee hours of the morning, and despite the poor lighting and rain, I caught a glimpse of what seemed to be a human figure run across the garden. I rushed upstairs to tell my father, and he ran outside with a knife, the best home defense weapon we could afford, but we found nothing. No one. The next day, we did find something, though. Footprints. Leading from the chicken cages to the water well. They were made in the wet mud from the rain, and they were of bare feet. No shoes. No socks. Just feet. My father had mercy on the man who was trying to find refuge and left him a note indicating that he had 2 days to leave and then he would begin to seal the well. I waited impatiently for my grandfather to tell me about the fate of the man. The following night, I got the idea to take a blanket down the well to the man since winter was creeping in. I waited until my parents were asleep and I snuck outside. I shouted something friendly down the well, indicating to the poor man that my intentions were benign, and I began my descent, clinging hand and foot to the pegs attached to the stones. As I neared the bottom, I smelled something absolutely horrific, and I pulled my father's flashlight from my pocket to try and shine it on the man. It was then I came to the realization of just how large the well was, having been used to supply water for the entire town and its families in the past. Families which no longer remained. But I found no man, only a hole. A gap in the stone where the wall of the well had collapsed, opening up to some type of crevice only 2 meters wide and 3 meters deep and tall. Inside sat not a man, but an entire family, of which only a single skeleton-like creature survived. The light reflected off of its sunken eyes and gray skin. Blood covered its face, and chicken carcasses were strewn everywhere, a pile of decomposing poultry beside a woman and what I suspected had been her son and daughter, children who couldn't have been much more than 5 years old. And they seemed to have been dead for weeks. The man, if he even could be called that, just gazed at the light, and I stared back, incapable of breaking his stare. I did not feel threatened by him, for he lacked any aggression whatsoever. He simply crouched motionlessly, without a sound, next to the putrefying bodies of his loved ones and the chickens that must have been his source of water, as their meat was uneaten. He was empty, devoid of whatever in us makes us human. He should have realized the members of his family had died long ago, but he was still bringing food for their corpses. He couldn't accept it. He did finally turn his head, though, when I shone the light back onto the corpse of his daughter. He stared at her, and then sat down closer to her and continued his vigil. "You can leave now," I said to him. "I'll open the gate so you can escape. My father will seal the well in the morning. Please leave now." My young voice and advice seemed to have no effect on him. At that moment, I decided it would be better for me to just climb back up the well and leave, and hope the man would follow and escape. As I began my climb, I shone the light on him one final time. "What did you see, Grandpa?" I shuddered. I saw a tear fall from his eye. He had become a man once again. He was only able to break free from the delusion after seeing the body of his daughter, which had until that time been obscured by the darkness. He realized then that he had been bringing food not to his family, but to corpses. That night, it rained again, but in the morning, when my father returned to seal the well, I found no footprints leading out of it. One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the nonsense living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity and for an easy way to bring up their GPA. I've been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller, than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class. So, I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of, "I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age," and "My brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard." And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent, old-person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I'll call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as she was, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell, Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scary animal. Across from her sat a man with a somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's olivia eyes flashed toward the screen, then back to the man. "I am here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He is going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a damn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice, I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical, boring stuff. So, I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." She said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Balkans very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same, except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper and plastic sleeves laid atop all the clutter on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor for X. I am." Mom coughed. Great-uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. "My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in limbs, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by on their way to go beg for money or whatever crap they did." The camera dipped toward the floor as I heard Mom whisper harshly at Great-uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. "Do you want to hear this darn story or not?" I heard him bark in response. "Then you better let me tell it how I want." "Mom," Olivia chimed. "Please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class?" "No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher." "I'm sure he's heard the word crap before," Great-uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he, as a matter of fact, but other than that, the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. I'm talking too much anyway," he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. "In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it. So I'm gonna read it now, and then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement." A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed in on Great-uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. "Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire, but I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadia suffered for longer. I watched in horror, knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadia to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home, and she died that night. After Nadia and the baby were gone, well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate or slept, and thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once. Even though I didn't listen to the words being said, in fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. The voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how much time passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first holed myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadia had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know. And the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I am happy to help. Some days, I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times, I handle more serious structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind this school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home, just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me, and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time. Except this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time, I have been crying. I am losing my mind without it. I have given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I am going to take my life. I am writing this because the sunlight is starting to die, and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach, and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadia died. I am not long for this world. But before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep, and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadia and little Ludmila in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen, Mom said, her voice choked. I think we have enough. Wait. Olivia chirped. He said there's more. What did you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. Hi, Miss Garrity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars. She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people, and even if they never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. Fine, came Mom's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish, Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen. But Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So, did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped, and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired humbly. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly, he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained, he must have gotten soaking wet but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted horrible. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body? Yes. Hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue, and his eyes were bulging. Like this. I imagined him demonstrating. And the radio? Olivia wept. I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there, all right. And it was still on. Addiction took our mother slowly, rocked her through it, and sang her to sleep, sunk deep into the mattress on her bed. When her back teeth fell out, she left them on the side of the bathtub. I was 7, and I kept them in a matchbox. Missing pieces of her kept safe so that she wouldn't be lost forever. So maybe, one day, we could put her back together. Our house fell around us, and we tried our best to raise ourselves. The ceilings had water damage, the bottom stairs had dry rot, and in the winters, the radiators bled rust. But it was still our house, and Annie made it a home. My sister Annie mothered me, with lopsided band-aids on bruised knees and lukewarm microwave meals. She told me ghost stories and didn't mind when I crawled into her bed later on, too scared to sleep alone. She taught me to dance, barefoot on the living room carpet, music channel on full volume on the TV, shaking our pre-adolescent hips. She always let me shower first so that I could enjoy the hot water and never complain when she had to make do with the cold. She brushed my hair every day before school, even when I screamed and hit her when she caught the tangles. Annie was dark-haired like her father, whoever he had been, but I was blonde. Annie was desperate to be blonde too, like Marilyn Monroe. Like Mom. I think she thought it would make them closer, remind Mom less of her dad. I'd give anything for her to have her hands in my hair one more time, even if it hurt. She moved to New York when I turned 18 and never came back. I still dream about her sometimes. Keeping up with our mother was impossible, and we learned from a young age that we would always be left behind. It didn't make it any easier. When she was drinking light, she was radiant and would wake us up at 3 a.m. with pancakes dripping in cherry syrup. Sometimes, when the weather was right, and she'd had enough of being drunk alone, she would call our school and tell them we had both come down with summer sickness, and we'd drive to the beach instead. I remember being 9 years old, in the back seat of the car coming home after one of our ocean days, sucking the salt from my fingers. Annie had just dyed her hair blonde, her best friend Jane helping her bend over our kitchen sink. From behind, I couldn't tell who was the mother and who was the daughter, radio up and windows down, blowing the sky inside. When she was drinking heavily, she'd be out all night, hair piled up like a beauty queen, eyes glazed over and ringed with glitter and black. Sometimes she'd be gone a day or two. She would never give us advance notice. One day we'd just wake up to an empty house, with the fridge packed full and a post-it note on its door, complete with a smear of Mom's lipstick and the outline of a kiss, telling us she'd be back soon. Sometimes she'd bring guys home, filling the table with beer cans and ashtrays, smoke up to the ceiling, Mom lost in the haze. We'd sleep with pillows over our heads, trying to drown out the music they would blast all night, and wake up to strangers at our kitchen table in the morning, asking us where we kept the coffee. When Mom drank too little, she fell apart. She wouldn't buy food, and the refrigerator went bare. She'd chain smoke, leaving cigarette burns on the wallpaper up by the stairs, like the walls were sick and decaying. She barely slept, walking around with blue half-moons under her eyes, knuckles raw. She would scream at the slightest thing. I remember once when I spilled a glass of juice on the couch. She looked over at me with dead eyes, dragged me off onto the carpet, then took every single cushion off the couch into the backyard and set them on fire. Annie went to watch a while from the window, then sat next to me on the floor, backs pressed against the skeleton of the seats, head resting in the crater of my collarbones. It was the worst when Mom drank too much. She'd laugh too loudly and too long at anything and everything until her mouth started to shake and she began to cry into her cereal at the breakfast table. Annie shut down when Mom was like this, going somewhere deep inside herself where no one could hurt her. She'd stay up until the morning watching old black and white movies on TV, whispering the lines she knew by heart like prayers. When I was 5 years old, I'd cry when I found Mom passed out on her bed, sure she would never wake up. Annie would wipe my tears and tell me she was only sleeping, like the princesses in my storybook. We'd sit on Mom's bed together and wait for her to wake up. When we were older, I was the one who would pick Mom up off the bathroom floor again and again, and Annie would put her to bed, smoothing her hair off her face, wiping the vomit from her mouth, and changing her clothes if she would herself. Watching them then, there was no doubt that Annie was the mother now. It was October, and I was 13, Annie 16. It was a Wednesday night, and Mom had been gone for 2 days. She called us that morning from a payphone, voice slurring, telling us she was having the best time with all her new friends and that she hoped we were doing fine. When she asked me if I was having a good birthday, I hung up on her. My birthday had been the day before. Annie had given me a pile of presents, strawberry lip gloss and glittery nail polishes. I didn't ask where she'd gotten the money for them. I didn't care. We'd taken the bus to the beach with Jane and ate the birthday cake she had made for me, sand getting into the frosting. It tasted like sweetness in the sea, and I savored every bite and scrape of sugar against my teeth. We watched the sun go down, Annie snapping grainy photos on her Nokia as I blew out my candles, wishing over and over that Mom wouldn't come home, that she'd stay gone this time. But that Wednesday night, Annie and I weren't speaking. Anger hung heavy between us, seeping through the floorboards. It began when she tripped at the bottom of the stairs. We both laughed, Annie throwing her head back, the gap between her front teeth catching the light. When I bent to pick her up, I felt her breath, warm against the freckles on my cheeks. I let go of her arms, and she fell again, hitting the floor and grinning, shaking her hair from her face. Her breath was heavy with whiskey. I couldn't start picking her up too, couldn't watch her fall again and again. Just like Mom. I knew she'd never get back up. I stared down at her, blonde hair hanging over her eyes, and all I could see was our mother. Then I was running, feet slamming the hallway like heartbeats turned loose. I ran for the kitchen and tipped every bottle we had down the sink, shoving Annie back as she fought to stop me, catching liquor on her fingers as it fell. She grabbed my shoulders and made me drop the very last bottle. It smashed between us on the floor, glass shards shining like we dragged the stars out of the sky and broken them like pieces we could never put back. Outside, through the open windows, the sky turned pale gold, the clouds a mess of pink and cream smeared across the horizon. I cried then, watching my sister on her knees, picking up the pieces. That was Annie, always trying to fix things even when it was too late. The smell of food dragged me from my room, my stomach turning traitor inside my ribcage. Annie was cooking pasta, real food not made in a microwave. She'd set the table, Tammy Wynette singing softly from the CD player, Annie gently swaying her hips as she stirred the tomato sauce, rich and warm. As we ate in silence, I forgave her more with every bite. Mom never cooked dinner, never remembered my favorite had been spaghetti since I was a kid, and never stayed sober long enough to sit up at a table. Annie wasn't Mom. We were washing the dishes when we first heard it. A moth was crawling down the inside of the pane, and I cracked the window to let it out into the dark. From the backyard came a faint sound. I tilted my head to listen. It was coming from far off. Crying. I figured it was Mika, the 2-year-old next door, having a tantrum loud enough for us to catch. Or maybe even Lucky Strike, the cat that belonged to the people down the street who used substances, begging for food like he sometimes did. I always wanted to feed him when he came around, winding over my ankles, but Annie always stopped me, saying once you started giving, they never stopped taking. Looking back, I don't think she was talking about the cat. Annie flipped the Christmas lights strung up around the porch, and we sat on the plastic beach chairs, watching the skies. When we were little, we'd sit outside, and Annie would tell me the names of all the constellations and the stories of how they came to be hung up in the night sky. I had to grow up before I realized she made them all up as she went along. It was a game we still like to play now, making up ridiculous stories for the shapes we could pick out. Ah, yes, that one there is the Coors Light. It got there when God dropped it out of his convertible window and never picked it up, she said, nodding sagely and hiding her smile. Of course, I said, waving my hands and pointing up past the power lines. Right next to the ashtray, left there by angels on a smoke break. Yeah, they say if you wish on it, all your dreams will come true, said Annie with a grin. Then she stopped laughing, and her voice grew quiet, face tilted up to all those dead stars. Let's wish, Emmy. Let's wish. So we did. The sound of wailing interrupted us. It was closer this time, and definitely human. We turned to one another in confusion. Annie shrugged, and I squinted into the black. It sounded like a baby, lost, tired, and alone. It must be Mika, I said, slowly getting to my feet. Maybe he walked around the back. Do you want to call Connie and tell her we'll bring him over? Annie didn't reply. I sighed and rolled my eyes. Okay, I guess I'll do everything then. I stepped off the porch, grass soft against my heels. The air smelled like it might rain, fresh and clean and growing. A promise unfulfilled. Annie's voice was strained. I turned to her with a smile. It died on my face when I saw the look on hers. Get inside. Now. She was staring out into the dark, past me, and opening the door with one hand behind her, fingers fumbling on the latch. I froze, barefoot in the dirt. I glimpsed what she was looking at. In the bushes by the back fence, someone was crouching with their knees tucked up neatly under their chin and their arms wrapped around their legs. Their mouth was agape, softly opening and closing as they cried. Like a child, lost in the dark. No, not like a child. More like someone pretending, mimicking the sound under cover of darkness. Suddenly, they straightened their back, snapping upright, face still obscured by shadow. They were tall and slim, extraordinarily thin by human standards. Panic made me move, carried forward by animal instincts left over from a time when people still lived in nature. I was faster than Annie, dragging her inside and slamming the door behind us, hearing it bounce on its hinges as I locked it. We watched as the person slowly approached the house with long, deliberate strides. Annie reached for my hand, holding me tight, and turned me to face her, gripping my shoulders. Don't turn around, Emmy. Don't turn around. Instinctively, I started to look over my shoulder into the gloom. Annie grabbed my face hard and shook her head. I knew then she was serious. Her voice cracked, and she cleared her throat, gripping my hand tight enough to hurt, nails digging in, grounding herself. I looked down at our interlocked fingers, both of us born of the same bones. I'm going to call the cops, and everything is going to be, her voice faltered, stuttering. Tears spilled over her lashes. Annie never cried. Your phone's on the porch, she whispered, and bile crawled its way up my throat. Her phone was upstairs, charging. A soft tapping filled the silence. Annie turned wide-eyed to the window. It was the sound of someone's forehead slowly and repeatedly bumping against the glass. Then the blows accelerated, gaining in both speed and strength, skin meeting glass, until they were slamming into the window hard enough to shake the panes. A moment later, the tapping stopped, and I was about to ask Annie if I could look now, when she screamed, followed by the sound of cracking glass and a tremendous crash. Whoever was in our yard had just smashed their face hard enough into the window to shatter it. We ran up the stairs 2 steps at a time, skipping the rotted ones out of habit. I turned to look behind me once, and Annie yanked my face back before I could see. The sound of glass breaking echoed behind us as we made it to the bathroom and locked the door. A weak, mewling cry, like that of an infant calling for its mother, filled the hallway, trapped between the walls and entryways. Annie threw her back against the door, feet jammed up against the bathtub, clutching a knife she had grabbed from the kitchen. I joined her, shoulder to shoulder, and did the same. Slow footsteps started on the stairs, calculated and casual. The crying took on mocking quality, resembling laughter, arriving in short, shrill bursts of sound followed by high-pitched giggling, and then silence, only to start again a moment later. The first door on the upstairs floor was my bedroom, and we heard the distinct sound of it slamming open. They were looking for us. What the heck is going on? I asked Annie, not even bothering to brush away the tears I couldn't keep from falling. I watched my sister pick herself up off the floor and brace her hands on the door as we heard the sound of a second door slamming open. Mom's room. The next room in the hallway was the bathroom. Annie pulled me to my feet and handed me the knife. I shook my head and pushed it back to her, terrified of what would happen if I had to use it. Annie shoved me and pressed the knife into my hands, thumb pressing hard enough along the edge to draw blood. I watched a winding road of crimson rivulets cascade down her wrist. In spite of the pain, Annie continued pushing the blade into my hands. Finally, I took it from her. Something slammed against the wall that Mom's room shared with the bathroom. A high-pitched howl followed. I held my breath and felt my heart beating frantically in the base of my throat. "I'm gonna get the phone from my room," my sister said. I shook my head dramatically in protest. Before I could say a word, Annie clamped a hand over my mouth. I could taste the blood on her hand, salty and sweet. Like birthday cake by the ocean. "Yes. I'm gonna get the phone, and I'm going to call the cops. We're going to be okay." I shook my head again. "It's the only way," Annie insisted. "When I go, I need you to lock the door, and I don't want you to open it for anything or anyone. Not for me, not for anyone. Promise me." I shook my head, and Annie pressed her hand against my mouth, pushing my teeth against my lips so forcefully it made my eyes water. "Promise me, Em." Something smashed in the room next door. Annie brushed the hair from my face and gently tucked it behind my ear. "Promise," she mouthed, and unlocked the door as slowly as possible, the bolt scraping gently. I watched the curve of her shoulder disappear into the darkened hall, like the moon in eclipse. And then she was gone. I couldn't move or breathe for a second, and then I slammed the bolt shut just as something bounced off the outside of the door. A high-pitched scream ensued, followed by the handle rattling up and down hard enough to pop a screw loose. I watched it roll toward me on the tiles. And then everything went still. I sat with my back to the door, holding the knife and wishing I was holding Annie's hand instead. The silence continued. For a moment, the only sound was that of my breath slowly filling the room. A voice broke the illusion of solitude. "Em?" A familiar voice came through the door. Startled, I gripped the knife even more firmly than before. "Honey, what's going on?" "Mom?" My voice cracked. "Mama, is that you?" I wrapped my arms around myself to keep from shaking. "Sweetie, it's okay. Just open the door." "It's okay. Just let me in." The handle rattled again, gentler this time. Just let me in, it's all okay. She banged impatiently on the door, and I took my hand off the bolt. Honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I missed your birthday. I'm sorry I'm such a terrible mother. Please. Her voice broke, and she started to cry. Just let me in, baby. I'm so sorry. I screwed my eyes shut. She sounded so sad and so lost. I just wanted her to hold me, like she did when I was a kid, when I come in with a scraped knee after falling off the swings. Maybe this time she meant it. Perhaps it would all be okay. My hand found its way to the bolt again. My sister's voice came through the door, warm and gentle. Yeah, Emily, let us in. It's all okay. My hand froze on the bolt, and I tightened my grip on my weapon. Annie never called me by my full name. A hand banged on the door, handle rattling. Emily, let us in. Annie's voice became low and guttural, followed by the same shrill giggles from before. Mom spoke now, pleading and crying, her voice growing louder and louder. Let us in. Let us in. Let us in, she shouted over and over again, punctuated by her fists on the door. I thought about bedtime stories and all the demons and monsters we pray never crawl out from under our beds. That's not my sister, and you're not my mother. I screamed through the door, hands over my head. I climbed into the bathtub, curled into the fetal position, and clutched the knife to my chest. I didn't know it was outside that door, but I knew it wasn't Annie. It wasn't the voice that scolded me whenever I changed the TV channel, the one that sang me happy birthday, the one that told me I was smart even when I got bad grades, the one that read me stories about princesses that never wake up. It wasn't human. Bangs and yells came from downstairs, followed by the footsteps of people running. A low, guttural howl ripped through the house, filling the room until I felt like I was drowning in the sound, and then the door was kicked in. I screamed, covered my eyes, and waited to die. A moment later, arms found me, lifted me from the tub, and carried me from the room. I looked at the outside of the door as I was taken downstairs. Its exterior was covered in long, scraping claw marks, stretching to the floor. I found the hallway covered in the soft, downy remains of torn-up pillows, making it appear as if it had snowed indoors. I watched the tiny feathers drift slowly as men in uniforms checked each of the rooms that looked like they had been ripped apart by something feral. Outside, police cars and an ambulance waited in our driveway, and there, in the middle of it all, was Annie, bathed in blue and red light and glowing in the dark like a neon angel. I threw myself from the officer's shoulders and ran to her. Then I held us both together, broken pieces and all, standing under all those constellations we concocted. Muffled screaming came from the ambulance, which rocked occasionally. Annie gently turned my head away, smiling so sadly it made my chest ache. I understood. It turns out there was no demon, no wild animal or bad men trying to break in. It was just Mom, out of her mind on booze, substances, and everything in between, coming to the end of a week-long binge. Something had finally broken inside her head, and this time we couldn't put her back together, no matter how hard we tried. Sometimes you fall one last time and never get back up. Annie had seen her rail-thin frame in the garden, blood dribbling from her mouth, track marks bulging on her forearms like unmapped roads, desperate for one more hit, one more fix. She'd searched the kitchen for all the alcohol I'd thrown away, and when she hadn't found any, she went hunting for the stash hidden in the bathroom. She hadn't wanted me, just the substances on the other side of the door. She'd been so high she was able to mimic Annie's voice nearly perfectly. The real monsters are the ones that eat you alive slowly, the kind that comes in a bottle or a needle, or at the end of a long list of reasons why you can't get out of bed in the morning. Sometimes, the monsters are the ones that raise you or love you the most. But it's up to you to let them in. It was 2:05 a.m. when I did it. Everything around me was completely quiet, not a single person in sight. I grabbed the folding ladder from my garage and neatly placed it right under the light post in front of my house. I quickly ran back inside and returned with the rope I had tied earlier that night. Looking up at the light, I started climbing to the top. Once I reached it, I quickly and carefully tied the end of the rope to the light and made sure it was secure before wrapping the noose around my throat. I stood on top of the ladder and looked down to see her still staring at me, waiting eagerly for me to kick the ladder from under my feet. I looked straight ahead, tears in my eyes, and convinced myself everything was going to be over soon. The nightmare would finally end. This is how it began. When I was 17, I became fascinated with urban exploring after watching videos about it. I started thinking how cool it would be to actually try it myself. I even convinced my best friend to come with me on my first expedition to an old school that had been abandoned for years due to funding issues. Kids in the area used to tell creepy stories about the place, saying it was haunted, but I dismissed it all as nonsense. At first, my friend didn't want to go, but eventually he caved and agreed. For some added excitement, we went at night, hoping to enhance the experience. We were both terrified, but once the adventure began, there was no turning back. And it was actually a lot of fun. We found old papers and textbooks, and even a box full of needles left behind by substance users who had squatted there from time to time. When we finally left, our hearts were racing, and we were smiling ear to ear. That adrenaline rush, from being in an old, supposedly haunted building, surrounded by remnants of the past and the eerie beauty of decay, had us hooked. We knew we needed more. After that night, my friend became obsessed with exploring old, abandoned buildings, especially those rumored to be haunted. We were both pretty skeptical about the paranormal, but the thrill was real. Exploring became our thing. It felt more fulfilling than just sitting at home watching movies or doing nothing, so we made it a tradition. Every Friday night, we'd pick a new haunted place and spend a couple of hours exploring. It wasn't always easy. Abandoned buildings weren't exactly common where we lived, so sometimes we'd revisit the same spots. Still, we didn't care. It was some of the best fun I ever had. Until everything changed the day my friend told me about Crimson Mansion. It was Thursday morning. My friend had come to pick me up for school, like usual. But this time, before I could even get into the car, he turned to me with excitement in his eyes. "I found the perfect place for us to go tomorrow," he said, grinning wide. "Oh yeah? Where at?" I asked. "I was talking to this guy in a chat room last night, just asking around about abandoned places we could check out. Anyway, this dude tells me there's an old mansion in the middle of the woods. It used to belong to some wealthy Japanese family. And get this, he said a lot of people died around there." "Wow, that's brutal. Where is it?" I asked, not quite matching his enthusiasm. It sounded a little sketchy to me. "I don't know the actual name of the place, but the guy called it Crimson Mansion. It's about an hour from here. He said if I wanted to see something really cool and creepy, I should check it out." Then he tried to scare me by saying, "Legend has it a particularly evil spirit lives in that mansion, so beware." "So, you know what we have to do now?" He looked at me with a grin. "Go at night." As much as I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, something about what the guy told my friend seriously creeped me out. But I didn't want to look pathetic, so I played it off like I didn't care. I told him we were going to have the time of our lives. That day passed like any other. But Friday? That day was the beginning of the end. That morning, I told my mom I was spending the night at my friend's place and would be back the next day. I went to school, got through my classes, and ended the day feeling good. Then it was time to leave. My friend picked me up. He already had directions pulled up on his phone. We had no idea we were heading straight into our worst nightmare. We'd been driving for about 45 minutes when we saw it, the edge of the forest, as if it had sprung straight up from the earth. The trees were unbelievably tall and eerily dark, like someone had painted them black. "Well, this looks inviting," my friend said, staring up at the swaying trees. "I didn't expect it to be this windy tonight," I said, glad I had remembered to bring my warm jacket. "The entrance should be up ahead on the right. Let me know if you see anything." As the sky darkened, we focused on the road, searching for any sign of an entrance. Finally, after about 20 more minutes, we found a dirt road leading into the woods. But there was a problem. It was blocked by a metal fence with a big, bold sign that read "No Trespass." It was odd. I expected it to say "No Trespassing." Still, we parked in front of the gate, grabbed our gear, and climbed over the tall metal fence. There was no path ahead, just thick overgrown bushes and trees. We turned on our flashlights and started walking into the forest. The wind had picked up, and it was getting colder by the minute, but we pressed on. "So, did this guy tell you exactly how to get there?" I asked. I didn't like the idea of getting lost in the woods. He said it's a straight shot from the gate. "So, let's just keep going straight." Not long after that, we stumbled onto a clear path right in front of us. We looked at each other, laughed with excitement, and moved forward. Then, just a few feet ahead, we saw it, a house. All white. The windows were shattered, the front door was missing, and the paint was peeling from every edge. "This isn't a mansion," my friend said, clearly disappointed. "It's just a big house. And it's not even red." He was right. The house was big, especially for being in the middle of nowhere, but it definitely wasn't a mansion. Still, our disappointment didn't last. We were giddy with excitement all over again. We slowly approached the house and made our way inside, where we saw something pretty strange. The whole bottom floor was devastated, with every single doorway blocked by debris, and no way around any of it, but the staircase in the middle of it all was untouched. The steps led up to a single red door, which was also surprisingly untouched. The paint on the stairs and the door looked old, but not as worn down as the one on the outside or the inside of the house. We looked around to see if there was any way to visit the bottom of the house, but there was just the staircase and the door to go through. With no other choice, we climbed up and opened the door. Inside was a large table pushed up against the end of the room, with candles on each side and what appeared to be a big book in the middle. The book had a red leather cover, with cobwebs all over it. My friend slowly reached out and opened it. The first few pages were blank, but then there was a photograph of a girl, not more than 15 years old. The picture looked pretty old, maybe from around the 30s or so. The girl was sitting down on what looked like a tree stump, looking straight at the camera, smiling, while her head rested on her hand. She had long black hair and a flowery dress on. She looked happy. Even the background was nice, with beautiful trees on a sunny day. "Guess it's an old family album that they left," I said to my friend. He didn't say anything and kept flipping through the pages. Each turn revealed yet another image, always of the same girl. Sometimes she was at the park, or in a house, or somewhere else, but it was just her. We were almost at the end of the book when we stumbled on a completely blacked out page. "Why the heck is the page black?" my friend asked. I didn't have an answer for him, and I think we were both hesitant about turning the page again. I wish we never did. As he turned the page, we saw the girl again, except this time, she wasn't smiling. She was standing in front of the house we were in, arms at her side, looking straight into the camera. Something about this picture was off, although I couldn't explain exactly how. My friend turned to the next page. Same girl, same spot, but this time she was smiling, with a noose around her neck. We both stared at the picture for a while, saying nothing. He turned the page. What we saw made us jump back, because the girl was now hanging, but she still had that smile on her face, looking straight into the camera, her neck slightly elongated, with her head tilted at an impossible, almost 90-degree angle. It was horrifying. The more I looked, the more scared I became. The feeling, staring at that picture, was just absolute dread. "Come on, bro, let's get the heck out of here," I said. Yeah, let's leave," he said, still looking at the picture. I knew he was scared too. He closed the book, and we practically ran out of the room. We got to the bottom, stepped outside, and froze. We were paralyzed. I felt myself start to panic and got slightly lightheaded. Right in the middle of the path, which connected the woods to the house, was the girl hanging from the rope. Her back was facing us, but we knew it had to be her. She wore the same flowery dress, with her neck still at a frightening angle. There wasn't a single sound outside. No wind, no animals, no rustling leaves, just absolute silence. All we could hear was our breath and the slow creaking of the rope as the girl's body swayed back and forth in the air. I looked up, but the rope wasn't attached to a tree. It just went up into the sky, with nothing visible that could possibly be holding it. We couldn't move, couldn't comprehend what was happening. Without warning, the girl's body suddenly fell from the sky, smashing her legs into the ground below, all of the bones breaking. My friend and I both fell back as if pushed by something, our flashlights falling to the floor and illuminating the body on the ground. We stared at her mangled corpse on the floor for what felt like forever. Then, faintly enough to have nearly been missed, we heard a laugh coming from her. It was a soft, almost delicate laugh, one your girlfriend might make when you say she's beautiful. Suddenly, we heard her bones breaking again, but this time they were snapping back into place. She was picking herself up, her shattered legs rearranging themselves. At last, the girl was standing, her neck still at that grotesque angle, looking away from us. She kept laughing. I looked at my friend, who looked as panicked as I felt. I quickly looked back at the girl as her arms started lifting up in front of her. With her arms fully stretched out, she began turning, but only her top half moved. Her legs stayed facing forward as she twisted around and revealed her face. The same twisted smile from the picture was exactly what we saw. Her laugh grew distorted, and at that moment, our flashlights went out. We both screamed. Only a second later, the light came back to our flashlights. The girl was gone. My friend looked at me, his eyes wide. "Run." We both snatched our flashlights and ran back the same way we had come. Sweat poured down my forehead, and my heart beat out of my chest. I ran faster than I ever had before. We kept sprinting into the night, but something wasn't right. The path we had taken hadn't been this long. As the thought occurred to me, that mocking laughter started up again, seeming to come from directly behind us. Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision and making me feel like my footsteps were growing slower and slower. Exhaustion started to set in, and I felt my limbs growing heavy. Right before I gave up, the path ended. I could see the fence. I ran through the thick bushes and branches and double-timed my way up the fence. Once on the other side, and next to my friend's car, I stopped and looked back. Nothing. Just the fence, the trees, and the darkness, and no sign of my friend. I listened to see if maybe he was running up, but I heard nothing. I called out to him, but got no answer. Several minutes passed as I kept screaming out for him. I knew that I couldn't go home alone. I had to find him. Summoning up all of my courage and trying to push my fear aside, I cleared the fence and started running back to the house. I found it almost immediately. In full panic mode, I stood in front of the door and called for my friend. A voice answered me from inside the house. Without thinking, I ran inside and went up the stairs, coming again to that door. I could hear someone moving, so I swung the door open, revealing the table and the book and the lit candles, but nothing and nobody else. As I stepped into the room, the door slammed shut behind me. I whirled around and tried to open it, prying at it with my fingers, but nothing helped. Part of my mind insisted that the wind had been responsible, but my fear was coming back, and it only escalated when the book on the table flung itself open. Even from my place near the door, I could see a picture of my friend hanging in front of his house, with his head almost completely to the side. I could barely breathe, but I saw that there was a second picture behind the page. I don't know what compelled me to step forward and turn it, but I did. The last page of the book was a picture of me, hanging, with my neck and face just like my friend's, hanging in front of my house. The candles went out, and I heard her laugh right behind my ear. Before I could scream, her hands grabbed my face and covered my mouth and eyes, and I felt like I was free falling into nothingness. I thought it would never end, but I suddenly opened my eyes and found myself at home, in bed. No, I thought it couldn't have been a dream. It wasn't a dream. I turned on my bedside lamp and started crying while I looked around the room. The picture of the girl was plastered on all the walls, covering everything. For some reason, though, my fear completely subsided. All I felt was sadness. As if compelled by her, I went downstairs to my garage, grabbed some rope, and tied a noose. I'd never tied a noose before, yet I did it without hesitation, perfectly. I couldn't stop myself, and for some reason, it didn't bother me. I was actually happy. The pain wouldn't last much longer. I opened my garage door and brought my father's ladder out, placing it under the light post right in front of my home. I looked down and saw her, the girl, gazing upward, her head still tilted on her deformed neck. Tears in my eyes, I jumped. I woke up in the hospital, tubes sticking out of my nose and mouth, hooked up to the beeping machines, whatever they're called. I looked around, but no one was there. I went back to sleep. Waking up again, all the tubes and machines were gone, just my parents, who hugged me as soon as they saw my eyes open. My father was crying, and my mom kept saying, "Why would you do this?" Apparently, I woke my dad up when I opened the garage and dragged the ladder out, so when he went to see what I was doing, he saw me jump and saved me. He asked if I had made a suicide pact with Sam, my friend. I asked why, and he said that his parents found him hanging in front of his house, just like I would have done if my father hadn't stopped me. I tried to explain what had happened that night, but of course, nobody believed me. My parents kept saying I was making things up, or that it was just the shock of almost dying. At one point, police came in and started asking a bunch of questions about what I knew and what happened when we went out that night. I still couldn't think straight, but I managed to tell them everything. They both looked at each other and said very calmly, "Son, someone saw your friend's car near a patch of forest in the middle of nowhere and called it in. Some officers went to check it out and saw that the keys were locked inside. He also found this. Is this yours or is it his?" One of the officers handed me a picture. It was her. The first picture we saw of her in that book. A peaceful scene indeed. I started bawling. My parents told me that I was going to stay in the hospital for a while because they wanted me under suicide watch, and I couldn't have cared less. It's been a little over 3 years now, and my life has somewhat returned to normal. While under suicide watch, the cops told me that they investigated the house I had talked about, but found absolutely nothing. It somehow didn't surprise me, and everything was left at that. When I got out of the hospital, I burned the picture and never went exploring again. I haven't seen her since, but I still catch glimpses of her sick, twisted face in my dreams sometimes, or more appropriately, my nightmares. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I'm crazy or if something was wrong with me that night, but all I know is that whoever that girl is, she is my friend. And I'm so sorry. My wife died at 1:33 p.m. on Friday afternoon. Her passing was not unexpected. Polly had been diagnosed with breast cancer the year before, and sadly, the doctors caught it too late. But still, she fought with everything she had, enduring months of intense chemotherapy until all her strength was exhausted. The last few weeks of Polly's life were spent in a hospice bed, with me by her side in a constant vigil. She was conscious and able to talk and eat for the first week, and I brought in her favorite foods as we talked, laughed, and watched our TV shows and movies. The change in her was quite sudden and, frankly, devastating, as overnight she became all but comatose, lying still in her hospital bed, unable to move or speak, even though her eyes remained wide open. It was a strange and unsettling thing. Deep down, I know my wife was dying for some time, but it didn't seem real while I could still carry on a conversation with her and share memories of the happy times we'd spent together. But on that morning, she simply stared at me with glazed eyes and her mouth open. I think that was the moment it really hit home for me. The nurses said Polly could still hear and understand me and that I should continue to talk to her throughout the day. I don't know whether this was true or not, but it brought me some small comfort to do so. And so, for those last few days, I talked to my wife, held her hand, fed her ice chips. They'd stopped feeding her food by this stage and waited for her to die. Don't get me wrong, I wasn't alone during this time. I had great support from our family and close friends, all of whom were daily visitors to Polly's bedside. And the hospice staff were fantastic, providing compassionate care right until the very end. But still, those last few days were a living hell for me. There was the pain of seeing the woman I loved reduced to this state, wasted away to nothing in a shell of her former self. And then there were my own feelings as a husband, to feel so useless, as I was unable to do a thing to help my dying wife or relieve her suffering. My Polly's death was expected, but also abrupt and shocking. I'm not sure what finished her off in the end, maybe a heart attack or stroke. I had just returned to her bedside when it happened, as Polly suddenly ended days of inaction by sitting up on her bed and gasping for air. I was astonished, and for a brief moment, I thought a miracle had occurred, my darling wife resurrected, saved from the jaws of death. But of course, this wasn't the case. A moment later, she was back on the mattress, convulsing violently as her body expended its last ounce of strength. I cried out for the nurse and held my wife tight, telling her how much I loved her as I struggled to hold back my tears. Mercifully, it was all over quickly, as Polly's body became motionless and she stopped breathing. The nurse was on hand to take her pulse, soon confirming that my wife had passed. And that was that. How can I describe my feelings in the moment after my wife's death? I'd be lying if I said I wasn't relieved, at least up to a point. Polly's suffering was finally over, as was the half-existence she'd endured over those last few days of her life. But that temporary feeling of relief was overwhelmed by the sheer horror of losing the person I'd loved most in the world. The next few days were done in auto-drive, as I coordinated with Polly's grieving family to arrange the funeral. That was an emotional day for sure. Many tears were cried, especially as we watched the coffin being lowered into the ground. But I took comfort from all the family and friends who attended and the heartwarming stories that were shared. It was the days and weeks that followed that were the hardest, when I went home alone to a house filled with memories of Polly, her clothes, her pictures, her books, even her scent was still present. And then, of course, there was the empty side of our bed. Everywhere, there were reminders of what I'd lost, highlighting the emptiness in my life which had so cruelly been thrust upon me. Well, this is a suitably depressing beginning to my story. But what more can I say about myself, other than the fact I'm a grieving widower? My life story in its entirety isn't relevant to the tale I wish to tell you. Suffice to say, I am a writer, specifically a horror writer. Now, I'm not saying I'm a successful author or even a particularly good one. I've sold a few stories and have self-published novels which have been reasonably well received. But I never made a full-time living from my writing. That said, it is my passion. And Polly was always my biggest supporter. She was my muse, my proofreader, and #1 fan. Frankly, I don't know how my wife dealt with all my nonsense over the years, but she was always there for me. It would be fair to say I've had a history of depression, and my writing has long helped me to work through these dark emotions. My art, or attempts at it, was therapeutic for me. But there was a big problem. The time immediately after Polly's death was the darkest period of my life, but I couldn't write. Not even a word. My passion was gone, replaced by the empty void of writer's block. In those black days, all my hope was gone, and the only solace I found was at the bottom of a liquor bottle. My solo writer's retreat wasn't a serious thing. I told my concerned friends that I needed some time alone to work on my next novel. And we're better than an isolated cabin in the woods to work on my latest tale of horror. But that was a load of nonsense. In reality, I was tired of my friends lecturing me on my drinking and wanting to get me out of the house. Honestly, I just wanted a place to be alone so I could wallow in drunken self-pity. But what I found out there in the woods was something I never could have predicted. And, despite the horrors I faced on that long night, I truly believe the experience saved my life. What can I tell you about the small log cabin where I was forced to face my demons? It was nothing out of the ordinary, quaint, tidy, but basic. I had the essential amenities but no phone signal or internet connection. I was indeed isolated from the outside world, my only company being the multiple bottles of cheap vodka I brought down with me and a laptop I didn't expect to use. I'll admit there was a peaceful tranquility in those woods, which I appreciated while looking out upon the pine trees with the sunlight creeping through the canopy. For a time, I did take comfort from my natural surroundings, but this respite was only temporary, and the grief and despair crept back in as soon as the sun went down. The darkness reminded me of all I'd lost and of the emptiness in my life. But when I looked into the dark forest, I didn't feel fear or apprehension. This, in a sense, was even more depressing. There was a time when my fertile imagination would have been filled with images of witches, werewolves, ghouls, and other ancient terrors. But not now. I'd loved horror my entire life. The idea of being scared always appealed to me in some perverse way. But what greater horror could the world inflict upon me? What more could I suffer, now that my beloved Polly was gone? Still, I hadn't quite given up all hope of doing some writing that weekend. Perhaps I was just going through the motions, or trying to make myself feel less guilty over my procrastination and defeatism. So, I switched on my laptop and found myself staring at a blank page on the screen, unable to find the words to tell my story. The blank page, always a writer's worst nightmare. I even tried reading back some of my previous work, the better received stories. But this didn't help either. I became increasingly despondent the more I read, believing that I'd always been a terrible writer and Polly had simply indulged me all those years. And what was the point of it all, anyway? Why had I spent so many hours writing these damn stories? And what did I have to show for it? The only good thing I'd done in my life was marrying Polly, and now she was gone forever. Sitting at the dining table with the window open, my eyes teared up and my vision became blurred as I downed drink after drink. I couldn't type a single coherent sentence over many hours. And after a while, I grew to hate the laptop, as it seemed like the blank screen was mocking me. Eventually, I lost my temper. In a moment of drunken rage, I lifted my laptop from the table and flung it out the window, watching with grim satisfaction as it landed with a crash on the grass outside. I expected the electronic device to smash into pieces, but it didn't. In fact, the laptop didn't even lose power, as the screen continued to emit its artificial light, shining an unnerving beacon in the middle of the empty forest. That was bizarre, but what followed next defied any logical explanation. I continued to watch the computer in awe and confusion as the screen burst to life. I was horrified to see a ghostly face appear, a twisted face filled with pain and terror. My jaw dropped, and I felt cold all over. Honestly, my exhausted brain could not comprehend what I was seeing, but this was only the beginning. A moment later, the face was no longer on screen. It was coming through it. A ghostly mask, and then a full head, emerged from within the laptop. That's not to say it smashed through the screen. Instead, it emerged from underneath, like the computer screen was a liquid membrane. But the nightmare didn't end there. First came the head, and then the rest of the body emerged: neck, shoulders, torso, arms, and finally 2 legs. The entire form of a fully grown adult should not have been able to fit through the narrow screen, but somehow it did. And before long, the figure had escaped his digital prison and was inexplicably standing on the grass, having made his way across to our world. It's difficult for me to describe the impossible entity which stood just yards outside the cabin window. For the purposes of this narrative, I'll describe the creature as a he, although I honestly don't know whether the entity had a specific gender, and he had no characteristics which would identify him as male or female. The entity did take on a humanoid form. He had 2 arms, 2 legs, and 1 head, and stood roughly 6 feet tall. There was not a hair on his body, and what passed for his skin, well, this was bizarre, to say the least. The entity was covered from head to toe by an artificial white glow, similar to the laptop screen from which he'd emerged. But not only that. His fluorescent white hide was also covered by words stretched across his skin like full-body tattoos. But these words weren't painted onto the entity, they were a part of him, making up his DNA. And as I looked closer, I realized the words that consumed him were my own, the product of my own twisted mind and the text from my stories. My eyes widened, and my whole body shook almost uncontrollably. I was unable to avert my gaze from the horror before me, and I continued to watch in awestruck terror as the entity slowly turned around to face me. He had few distinguishable features on what passed for his face, no nose or ears that I could see, and only a slit where his mouth should be. But when I looked into his hideous eyes, my heart almost stopped. Those damned eyes, if you can call them that. They burned a fierce red, appearing like portals to hell itself. And he was looking straight at me with such intensity, like I was the only person in the entire universe from his perspective. I can't describe the terror I experienced when staring into those burning orbs. But I was frozen in that moment, and try as I might, I could not look away. An unbearably tense moment passed before the creature's slit-like mouth slowly opened, revealing a gaping black hole within. Then the creature emitted a blood-curdling scream, which echoed through the forest, a banshee-like wail that shook my very soul. This is what broke me from my terror-induced paralysis. I darted forward, slamming the window shut as the unholy screaming continued. Next, I retreated from the living room, turning my back on the horrifying creature as I fled into the hallway and then to the bedroom, slamming the door shut behind me. I cowered inside the bedroom for quite some time, my head throbbing and body trembling. The screaming eventually stopped, only to be replaced by an ominous silence. Ultimately, I worked up enough courage to creep over to the bedroom window, tweaking back the curtain so I could peek outside. But there was no sign of the bizarre entity I'd witnessed only moments before. In fact, there was nothing out there, nothing but the dark trees, and no sounds other than the distant chirping of crickets. I began to reassure myself. Surely, I had imagined the impossible creature. His appearance must have been a hallucination brought on by substance use and sleep deprivation. I laughed bitterly at my own foolishness, telling myself how ridiculous this all was. There was no monster outside. Nothing had emerged from my laptop screen. Ghosts and ghouls weren't real, and the only horrors in this world were suffering and inevitable death. I picked myself up and sheepishly exited the bedroom, making my way back to the living area. Looking out the front window, I saw my laptop still lying on the grass, its screen now black and its power off. I shook my head before sitting back down at the dining table and pouring myself another drink. The delusion had at least proved to be an exciting interlude, enough to get my blood pumping. But now it was over. I had nothing to look forward to other than a depressing night of heavy drinking and self-pity. Or at least, that's what I thought. But as I downed yet another vodka, I was interrupted by a loud knocking on the front door, a shock that made me jump up from my chair. Needless to say, I wasn't expecting visitors, and my mind instantly returned to the entity which I'd assured myself wasn't real. There surely couldn't be a connection. But still, who would be out here at this time of night? For a while, I remained silent, hoping that the unwanted visitor would give up and leave. But this didn't happen. Instead, the knocking only grew louder and more intense until I thought the door would come off its hinges. Finally, I had enough, jumping up from my chair and stomping out into the corridor, my blood pumping with adrenaline and fear. "Who's there?" I shouted once I reached the door. The banging abruptly ended, followed by a moment of ominous silence. And then the visitor replied to me through the closed door. I say replied, but in actual fact, he repeated my own words. "Who's there?" The voice had an uncanny and almost inhuman quality to it, and the stranger's tone sent a chill down my spine. "What the hell do you want?" was my next question, spoken through trembling lips. A short pause followed before the stranger once again repeated my exact words. "What the hell do you want?" What really freaked me out was the voice, still uncanny, except this time he was clearly mimicking my own tone and pitch. I felt scared and insulted at the same time, believing the unwanted visitor was deliberately mocking me. "You're trespassing. Get out of here, or I'll call the police," I exclaimed. This was a bluff on my part. There was no mobile signal out here, and the cabin didn't have a landline. I guess the stranger saw through my lie, because his response was even more cruel mockery. "Trespassing. Call the police." What followed was a twisted cackle that made my blood turn to ice. A moment later, he started banging on the door again, furiously trying to break through. My brain went into panic mode as I realized I had to defend myself. Running back into the living room, I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, the half-empty vodka bottle. I moved back into the hallway with my makeshift weapon. But the banging had stopped. The front door was sturdy and it held up to the powerful assault, so I hoped the attacker had given up. But then I remembered the cabin had a back door, and I thought I'd left it unlocked. Fearfully, I retreated to the small kitchen, only to find my attacker had already entered. The figure standing before me was someone from a nightmare, or more specifically, a horror story of my own making. I recognized him straight away, noting the close similarities to the description in my writing: the leather jacket and denim jeans, disheveled and greasy dark hair, heavy stubble on his chin, and the twisted smile on his dry lips. And then there were his eyes, dark, terrible eyes filled with malice and rage. He was exactly how I'd envisioned him while writing. But how could he be here in the flesh? I stood there, staring at him across the kitchen floor, paralyzed in shock-induced fear and unable to utter a word. "You know who I am?" the intruder snarled. "Yes," I answered, in little more than a whisper. The intruder's name was Jack Leach, and he was a serial killer from a hellish dimension, dropped into our world to cause bloody mayhem. Jack grinned sadistically, his eyes lighting up with murderous glee. "Then you know why I'm here," he spat. In that moment, I swore I could see something else behind those dark eyes, a burning crimson I'd seen before. But I didn't have time to put two and two together, because a second later, Jack was charging manically toward me like a predator descending upon his prey. I acted on pure instinct, lashing out with the vodka bottle and striking my attacker on the head. He grunted as the glass shattered and fell to the floor. I ran, heading for the front door and struggling with the lock. But Jack was soon back on his feet. His head was bleeding, but the killer was furious, shouting obscenities as he charged down the hallway. I was still trying to get the door open when he hit me from behind, punching me hard in the lower back. The pain shot through me as I crumbled onto the floor. But Jack didn't hesitate. He kicked me mercilessly while I was down. Next, he grabbed me roughly by the shirt, throwing me across the floor with unbelievable strength. My whole body hurt, but I didn't want to give in. I couldn't let this monster end my life. I tried to stand up and fight, but Jack was too quick and too strong. In an instant, he was on top of me, pinning me to the ground while his huge hands wrapped around my throat. He started to squeeze, exerting enormous pressure as he slowly throttled me. Panic set in as I struggled desperately, but to no avail. I saw his hideous face looking down at me, spittle and blood falling from his mouth, and his dark eyes filled with madness. I grew weaker as my brain was starved of oxygen. The fight had been beaten out of me. Then I lost consciousness, my eyes shutting as the darkness took me. I shot up from the wood floor in a panic. But Jack wasn't there. The cabin door was open, and a cool breeze was blowing in. Had Jack gone? Had he left me for dead? My throat hurt like hell, and my body would be covered in bruises, but somehow I was still alive. I'd been given a second chance, and I intended to take it. In an instant, I was up on my feet and sprinting outside. I went straight for my car, fumbling with my keys before I could get the door open and jump into the driver's seat. Next, I put the key in the ignition, but the engine wouldn't start. It was completely dead. I slammed my fists on the steering wheel in angry frustration and tried to think. Perhaps Jack, or whoever he really was, had deliberately sabotaged my car. Maybe he'd left me alive on purpose. The bastard was toying with me, working to prolong my suffering before he finally finished me off. I felt physically sick as I looked out into the dark forest, which had suddenly become much more sinister. What would I do now? I could try to escape on foot. Maybe I could make it to the road and flag someone down. But I didn't fancy my chances of making it through the woods, not with him still out there. I nervously looked back toward the cabin. It pained me to return there, given the horrific attack I'd just suffered. But I reckoned my best chance was to barricade myself inside and try to hold out until daybreak. So, slowly and cautiously, I got out of the car and made my way back to the cabin, securely locking the front door behind me before repeating the process with the back door. But I made a critical mistake. I'd forgotten to check the cabin's interior. And when I retreated into the living room, he was there waiting for me, sitting comfortably on the couch with a grin on his lips. The intruder waiting for me on the living room couch wasn't Jack. It took me a moment to realize, such was my near-total shock. But the entity seated before me was yet another creation from one of my stories. His name was Mr. Schwartz, and he masqueraded as a door-to-door salesman, although his true agenda was very sinister. His appearance was almost the exact opposite of Jack Leach. Schwartz was well dressed in a finely tailored suit, with shined shoes and a bright red tie. He was undeniably handsome, clean-shaven with his blonde hair slicked back. The smile on his lips seemed genuine enough, as did the twinkle in his blue eyes. But, on closer inspection, I could see the malice in those eyes, and something else too, a red tinge behind his pupils, which hinted at the true identity of Schwartz and of Jack Leach. My aching brain was finally putting the pieces together, but perhaps Schwartz could fill in the blanks. He stood up once I entered the room, smiling amicably as he offered his hand in friendship. I refused to shake, but Schwartz was undeterred as he addressed me by my first name. "Please, Edward. I am not your enemy. I simply want to talk." Please, take a seat." He nodded toward the chair facing him. I thought for a moment, trying to decide what to do. None of this made any sense, but I had been forced to accept the impossible. If my theory was correct, then the entity that had emerged from my laptop screen could take on multiple forms, first as Jack Leach, and now as Mr. Schwartz. I had no idea how this could happen, but one thing was for certain: the entity had tried to kill me, strangling me within an inch of my life. And sure, Schwartz wasn't threatening me right now, but I knew all too well how dangerous he could be. My instincts told me to run, but where would I go? And how far was I likely to get before he caught up with me? As unpleasant as it was, I felt I needed to stay and hear him out, and perhaps I would discover the creature's purpose. And so, I sat down with the beast and asked him the most obvious of questions. "What are you?" Schwartz's smile didn't falter as he answered. "You know who I am, Edward. You created me, after all." I shook my head in disbelief, not wishing to meet the monster's gaze. "Whatever you are, it's clear you can transform with the blink of an eye," I said fearfully. "You're using my own words against me, taking the form of the monsters I created on page." Schwartz chuckled before repeating what I'd said in an apparent confirmation. "Your words, your monsters." I felt a burning anger in that moment, meeting the monster's eyes and seeing the red orbs which showed a glimpse of his true form. "What do you want from me?" I spat. Schwartz laughed gently once again before revealing his agenda. "Come now, Edward, you know who I represent and what I can offer you. And I know what you desire more than anything in the world. Polly, your beloved wife." My stomach dropped as I was sickened to hear my lover's name come out of this beast's foul mouth. "What the hell do you mean?" I asked impatiently. "Polly," he repeated. "I can bring her back into your loving arms. You can be together again, and all I need from you, Edward, is a pledge of fealty." This time it was my turn to smile, because I understood what was happening here. In my story, Mr. Schwartz was an emissary of hell, a demon in fine clothes who would visit the sad and desperate, offering them vast riches or the return of lost loved ones in exchange for their souls, of course. "I'm sorry, Mr. Schwartz, but you're forgetting one thing. I know how this story ends. Anyone who makes a deal with you and your master lives to regret it." Schwartz was fast losing patience, and anger entering his voice as he became more direct. "So, what is your answer, Edward? Yes or no?" I thought for a long moment, seriously considering the entity's proposition. Could he really bring Polly back? And would it be worth sacrificing my own soul to give the woman I loved a second chance? But no, it must be a trick. The entity didn't have the power to bring back the dead. He was merely mimicking the character from my story, speaking his lies and offering false promises. In the end, my decision was an easy one. "That's a definite no," I answered defiantly. In that moment, Schwartz's mask slipped, and his words were filled with a bitter fury. "You damned fool," he spat, rising from his chair and pointing aggressively in my direction. "I offer you the chance to save your wife, and you're too much of a coward to take it. You want to know the truth, Edward? You prefer to dwell in self-pity and grief, to drink yourself to death. You're a pathetic worm, and you were never good enough for her." I saw red in that moment, unable to contain my anger after his hateful tirade. Jumping up from my chair, I confronted Schwartz, screaming in his face and shouting, "Go back to hell!" But my act of angry defiance was ill-advised, and Schwartz responded with violence. In an instant, his true face was revealed, that of a wicked demon with darkness in place of a soul. He roared with bloodthirsty fury before putting his claw-like hands upon me, shoving my body with immense strength. I hit the dining table hard, experiencing a shooting pain in the back of my head before I blacked out. Once again, I awoke to find myself alone, my head throbbing and my whole body aching, but I'd been left alive by the entity. I wondered why he was doing this to me. Did he enjoy tormenting me? Probably. The manifestations of Jack Leach and Mr. Schwartz had beaten me half to death, but the real damage was done to my already fragile psyche. I'd been in a bad way before I even arrived here, with my grief consuming me and destroying what little was left of my sad life. But the torture inflicted upon me by this hellish entity had pushed me over the edge. Schwartz's words in particular had really hurt me, and I couldn't get them out of my mind. He called me a coward, a pathetic worm, said I was never good enough for Polly. Maybe he was right. What hope did I have now? What would my life be without Polly? A living hell, that's what. I picked myself up off the floor, seeking out another vodka bottle from the kitchen as I tried to ease my pain with alcohol. I took a long swig while stumbling into the corridor, but I froze once I saw the entity's latest horrific manifestation. The figure stood tall in the hallway, blocking the way to the door. No matter, as I knew there was no escape from this evil. The monster before me had no mouth, no visible eyes, and no physical features whatsoever. It took the shape of a man, but his form was nothing but darkness. My heart sank as I realized what I was seeing, yet another monster of my own creation. I called this beast the Shadow. He had no other name, but what he represented was despair and death. In my story, the Shadow had stalked the halls of a haunted hotel, driving the residents to despair and suicide before the staff and ghouls joined forces to defeat the demon. My characters had worked together to survive, but I was alone, and in that moment, my last shred of hope was gone, replaced by nothing but empty despair. The Shadow didn't speak. In fact, I don't believe he could speak, other than to transmit images of horror into my subconscious. But he did raise what passed for his arm, pointing in the direction of the bedroom. I could no longer defy the entity and instead followed his instruction without question, dropping the bottle and slowly walking into the bedroom to face the horror within. The end the entity had apparently prepared for me was simple yet chilling, as I saw a pre-prepared noose hanging from the ceiling with a strategically placed chair beneath it. And finally, I understood. The entity wasn't going to kill me. He wanted me to end my own life. I knew I should fight back, but all my strength was exhausted. Polly was never coming back, and perhaps death was the only way I could be reunited with her. That was assuming there was an existence after this life. But even if there wasn't, death would at least relieve me of my misery and grief. I could see no other way out at this point, and so I decided to give the entity what he wanted, stepping up on the chair and securing the noose around my bruised neck as the Shadow watched silently from the doorway, a flash of red appearing in the darkness where his eyes should be. I paused for just a moment, my last thought being of Polly and how much I missed her. Then I kicked the chair out from under me. The noose tightened around my throat, and once again my brain was deprived of oxygen. Reflexes kicked in as I fought against the rope. But the noose was too tight. I began to black out, feeling sure that my end was finally here. But suddenly I heard a loud snap, and next I was falling, my body hitting the ground hard. There was another lost period in my memory before I pulled myself up, coughing and spluttering as I tore the noose from my neck. I looked up in astonishment, realizing that the rope had indeed snapped. Why had this happened? Hadn't the entity wanted me dead? Or was this another one of his torturous tricks? I was still on my knees, tears in my eyes as I was overwhelmed by pain. But then I heard a soft, reassuring voice call out to me, a voice I thought I'd never hear again. "Eddie, please don't cry. It's going to be okay." I looked over to the bed in astonishment, and there she was, Polly, my Polly. She was under the covers, not in full health but still with color in her face, like she'd been in those better days in the hospice before her terminal decline. I was awestruck by her beauty, my broken heart filled with the passions of old as I remembered all the treasured memories from over the years. I immediately pulled myself up and went to her side, taking the hand Polly offered me, savoring the familiar warmth of her palm. I used my other hand to gently brush back her beautiful hair, and I looked into her expressive brown eyes, my heart melting as I struggled to speak. "Polly," I eventually spluttered, "you don't know how much I've missed you." She smiled gently, squeezing my hand tighter as she answered, "I know, Eddie. I know all too well. I've seen how much you've suffered since my passing. I know you're hurting, my love, but I'm here to tell you, this has to stop." I shook my head in confusion, not understanding what my wife was saying. "What has to end?" I asked. "What you're doing to yourself, Eddie," she answered. "The drinking, the isolation, all this self-destructive behavior. This isn't what I want for you, Eddie. I need you to process your grief and move on with your life." She paused momentarily, pulling me in closer as she whispered into my ear. "Everything that's happened tonight has happened for a reason," she explained. "It's been hell for you, and I'm sorry, but you need to go through the pain to get to the other side." Something clicked inside my head, and finally, I understood. My eyes teared up as my emotions overwhelmed me, and I struggled to splutter out my words. "I don't want to let you go, Polly. I know you don't, Eddie. But you must. You need to heal, to write, to live your life and be happy. But know that I'll always love you, my Eddie." "I love you too, Polly," I replied. My words seemed so inadequate. But I followed my declaration with a kiss, meeting her soft lips for the last time. In that final second, I saw a hint of red behind her brown eyes, and with that, my wife was gone, her form disappearing and leaving the bed empty. It should have been devastating to lose her again, and yet I felt a strange sense of peace in the aftermath. Soon after, I left the bedroom, walking past the wreckage caused by the entity's previous appearances, which I now realized were part of a greater plan. I unlocked the cabin's front door and walked outside, just in time to see the sun rise on the far horizon. And I sat down on the grass, savoring the fact that I'd survived to see another morning. That fateful night in the cabin was a turning point for me, and I haven't looked back since. I still miss Polly and think of her every day. But I've taken my wife's final words to heart, slowly but surely rebuilding my life, reconnecting with my family and friends, seeking help when I need it, and, of course, healing through writing. This is my first effort since Polly's death, and many will believe it's a work of fiction, but I can assure you this isn't the case. As for the entity, I can't say for certain what he or she was. At first, I thought I was being tormented by a demon, but now I think this might have been my guardian angel. In any event, what I suffered that night happened for a reason, to give me the closure I so desperately needed. And some will say I didn't speak with Polly that night. They'll say that the creature was merely mimicking my late wife based on my memories. But I know my Polly, and I'm certain she found a way to reach out to me from the other side, delivering the message I needed to hear to pull myself back from the brink. To my darling wife, until we meet again. When I got the first one, I was literally seconds away from stepping onto the plane when a call from unknown blared from my cell phone. It was a ringtone I hadn't heard before, one I was pretty sure hadn't come with the phone. Normally, I wouldn't have stopped to answer it, but I was expecting a call about a job I had interviewed for the previous week. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. "Hello? Do not get on the plane." A woman's voice, garbled and strange, as if her vocal cords had been shredded and she was trying desperately to choke out speech. Despite the unnerving, fractured quality of her voice, her tone was insistent and eerily calm. Then the call ended. I froze. I had always had a slight phobia of air travel, and something about this call there's no way I was about to get on a 7-hour flight now. I turned around and headed toward the food court. I figured I'd just get another flight later in the afternoon. I watched from the airport Starbucks 3 hours later as every TV in the terminal lit up with crash footage of the plane I should have been on. No survivors. Not a single one. I tried to trace the call. So did the police. But there was nothing to trace. There was no evidence my phone had ever received a call around that time. They analyzed phone records, incoming and outgoing communication to my phone. Nothing. I wasn't making it up. I couldn't have been. That wasn't the only call. Throughout the years, they were few and far between, but always right. And I always listened. Do not go on that blind date tonight. 5 months later, my would-be date was convicted of killing 4 women, all with my hair color and build. They found them in a shallow grave about 250 feet from the diner he offered to take me to. Do not drive to the concert tonight. An 18-wheeler lost control and plowed into a line of cars. Every driver crushed. Every driver killed. In this stretch of freeway I would have been driving down. No matter if I got a new phone or moved across the country, the calls would still come. I could almost feel the presence of whatever it was, whatever it is, watching over me. I imagined being at the bottom of the freezing ocean, still strapped into my coach section plane seat, or being in that mass grave across from the diner, or watching an 18-wheeler skidding toward my car, knowing death was imminent. And I get this tightness in my chest. I think about how thin that line was. How close I'd gotten. If I hadn't had a job interview I was waiting to hear back from, I'd have never listened to that first call. And that would have been it for me. It always felt like something was coming for me. But there was always this fractured, warped voice, with these calls that never seemed to exist after I heard them. Self-destructing warning signals running away before my eyes. And I was alive. I had a bad feeling about this cruise. I had planned it as a girls' week out with some of my old friends from college and was looking forward to a week in the tropics in the dead of winter, but part of me could almost sense that the call was coming. Maybe I'd watched Titanic one too many times, but there was a little nagging fear from the start. I hoped it would be fine, but I knew that if something was going to happen, I'd get the call. I'd know. Now, a week before I'm set to go on the cruise, after stepping into my apartment after returning from dinner with a friend, I noticed my cell has a message from unknown. They'd never had to leave a message before. I hadn't checked it all night. Damn it, and I had really wanted to go on that cruise, too. Ah well, not worth whatever horrific fate awaited me in that cold, dark ocean. I click play message and feel my stomach drop as I listen to the voice, sounding horrifically distorted, as if it emanates from a throat slashed to ribbons, crackling with more urgency than ever before. I look around my apartment as the voice on the phone repeats the same phrase over and over again. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Do not come home after dinner tonight. Do not come home after dinner tonight. There is no fear as potent as the fear of the unknown. No monstrous visage discovered yet has been as terrifying as the infinite potential for horror which exists before the mask is removed. That is why we humans, in our naive misunderstanding of the universal order, are gripped by the mortal fear of death. We think it the final frontier, the greatest imaginable unknown, from whose penumbral shores no traveler may return. And so we cling desperately to even the most dreary and anguished lives, suffering any known evil over our release into the beyond. But death is not to be feared, because death is very well understood. We have witnessed it, caused it, measured and recorded it to the last dying spasm of neuronal flickering. Even as I lay dying, it seemed silly to me that I should be afraid of the emptiness which reason promised to expect. While I was alive, I wouldn't experience death, so there was no reason to be afraid now. When I was dead, I wouldn't be capable of experiencing anything, so fear still had no cause. That thought brought me great comfort as I felt the last erratic struggle from my heart against the inevitable conclusion I approached. It wasn't until I was finally drifting off to sleep that a final intrusive doubt bubbled in my brain. What if it isn't death which is to be feared? What if it is what lies beyond? And so troubled did I slip beyond mortal understanding, stepping into a world as far forsaken by reason as I was now from life. I was still in the hospital room, but the bustle of nurses and the beeping machines lost their opacity, as though I was mired in swiftly descending dusk. It seemed as though every sound was an echo of what it once was, every sight a reflection. With each passing moment, the world was becoming less real. But all that sight and sound, all that being, it wasn't simply disappearing. It was transforming into a figure beside me. The less real my room became, the more real the figure was, until presently it existed in such sharp actuality that nothing beside it seemed real at all. His cloak was black. Not the color black, but its essence. It was as though seeing a tiger after a lifetime of looking at a child's crude drawing and thinking that's all a tiger was. Reality flowed around his side like a brush through watercolors, and I could see each elementary particle and time itself sunder across its blade. Surely this, I thought. This is why we were taught without words to fear death. I clutched at my hospital blanket to cower from the intensity of the Reaper's presence, but the once soft cotton now flowed like translucent mist through my hands. I knew in that moment that nothing could hide me from the specter's grasp, for he was the only real thing in this world. "You're late." They weren't words. My head ached from the strain of this knowledge as my lateness was burned into my awareness, imparted like an inescapable law of physics as unequivocal as gravity. "We don't have time for the usual speech. Hurry now." I felt myself swept up around him like dirt in a hurricane. Before I knew what was happening, we were outside the hospital, moving at such a frenzied pace that the world around me blurred into a dizzying tunnel of flashing light. If you're lucky, IT will have gotten bored of waiting for you. I had too many questions, all fighting for attention in the forefront of my brain, without any making their way out. "You're quiet." I admire that. Usually, people ask too much. "What's the point?" I asked. My voice felt flat and dead compared to his overwhelming substance. How can I try to comprehend something so beyond mortal knowledge? You can't. But it's still human nature to ask. We weren't slowing. If anything, our pace was increasing. I wasn't running or flying or anything of that nature. It was more like the rest of the world was moving around us while we stood still. A vague darkness and a heavy, damp smell made me guess that we'd gone underground, but I couldn't say for sure. One question then, I asked. "What else is here besides you?" And that is why questions are pointless. Death is not a place or a person. It's all there is. Troubling thought, but made more so by the growing howl which began reverberating the rocks around me. We still seemed to be descending into the earth, and the air was growing warmer and denser now. The sound continued to mount, as though the world itself was suffering. "Then what is IT? What I'm here to protect you from." The rock split from a flash of his scythe, and the ground opened further into a sprawling cavern dominated by a subterranean lake. "But I thought you said you were all there is." "No, I said death was all there is." We were moving any longer. Light glinted off the side from some unseen source and streamed into the lake like a tributary. Once inside, the light didn't reflect or dissipate, but swirled and danced like luminescent oil. "I thought you were death." Death is not a person. The light was taking a life of its own inside the water. The still surface began to churn with the enigmatic energy. It took my scattered mind a long while to realize that I was the energy flowing into the lake. I still felt tangled up with the figure, but we now existed as a beam of light boiling into the water. I knew I wouldn't understand, but that didn't stop me from feeling frustrated. If death is all there is, then what is IT? What was waiting for me? The water pressed in around me, and I couldn't speak, although I could still draw breath somehow. "It is here." Something was in the water around me. Hands grabbed me by the legs and began dragging me downward. I was amazed to even discover I had limbs again. They felt so alien to me that it was almost as though this body was not my own. Light flashed from the side, then again. The hands let go, and the howling rose once more. The Reaper was fighting something, although I couldn't make any sense of the battle except for the madness of thrashing water. The howling earth reached its crescendo, and the screams made the water around me convulse and contract like living fluid. Had the Reaper cut it? Was I safe? I began to explore my new body in the water, but just when I thought I was beginning to gain control, the hands clutched me once more. I lurched downward, struggling in vain against their implacable grip. "What is here?" I tried to shout against the suffocating liquid. "What is happening?" But I couldn't sense the Reaper's presence any longer. The heat was unbearable, but the cold depths the hands were dragging me toward were even worse. I became aware of a blinding light at the bottom of the lake, and though I struggled, the hands dragged me inexorably onward. "I'm sorry." I couldn't fight it off. It seemed to be coming from so far away now. "We will try again next time." The pressure, the heat, the noise, the hands dragging me into the blinding light. I closed my eyes and screamed. I was free from the water now, but I just kept screaming. I couldn't bear to look at whatever had stolen me. Whatever was death but wasn't, whatever even the Reaper could not defeat. Then words spoke. Real, human words from a real human mouth. My senses were so distraught that I couldn't make sense of them, but I'm guessing they were something like, "Congratulations. He's a healthy baby boy. Most people can't remember the day they die, or the day they were born. I happen to remember both, and I know that they are the same." They follow the same neat routine every day. The boy wakes up to the sound of that unpleasant alarm at 6 a.m. every morning, Monday through Friday. I listen carefully to the sheets rustling above me as he tosses, turns, and shifts in his bed, struggling to force himself awake. On the occasion that he falls back asleep in the safe, warm embrace of his bedding, face nuzzled sweetly against his puffy down pillow, his mother will come in. Now, his mother often wakes up at 5 in the morning, a beautiful time when the light of the morning sun is still waking with the rest of Earth's creatures. I can move more freely at this time, though risky as it may be. I watch her arise. Her husband lies silent, still consumed by a world of dreams. I follow her to the bathroom and watch while she cleans her face, brushes her teeth, and prepares for the day. Sometimes she sees me, but never thinks anything of it, how exhilarating those days are, to make eye contact with the people who house me. As she wanders downstairs to prepare breakfast, we part ways and visit the boy. As I mentioned earlier, on occasion he will sleep in, much like today. I stretch out and relax, awaiting the mother's arrival. It is always pleasant to be in the company of my family. She arrives on schedule. With breakfast ready, she won't be letting him sleep any longer. I have watched this week after week, and in my humble opinion, it is this behavior that makes the child feel he can sleep as he pleases. This routine is what gives me strength, what gives me confidence. My eyes follow the door as it opens, and I watch her fuzzy slippers step closer. Her skin smells so sweet. For a woman of her age, her soft flesh is so tightly wrapped around her legs, it is all I can do to stay put and not act on instinct. I let the aroma fill my nostrils and allow her voice to dance along my ears. She walks out of the room, and soon my vision is obscured by cartoon character pajamas and bare feet. His toes are so small, so delectable, little treats on little feet. I reach out to touch them, my claws leaving the safe haven of darkness that conceals all that go bump in the night. The light burns my flesh as my claws sprout from under the bed. They brush against his clothes, so very close to that youthful perfection. The pain surges through my hand, my arm. It's almost more than I can handle. I reach forward to grab his ankle, and he steps away. I pull my hand back under the bed, nursing the burns, but the thrill of the hunt fills me with glee. I am so proud of how good she is to him and how much he is growing into a little man. I fade into the shadows and vanish from his room. The father is still asleep. It's 7 a.m. now. The bus should be arriving for the little one soon, and how I will miss him. I contemplate following him to school, but risk outweighs reward. Exciting as the thought is, to be left stranded in a schoolyard, even though I would be blessed with tender morsels left and right, I may not make it home. The last thing I would want is to leave my home unguarded, to come back and find it claimed by another. No, I must defend my home, defend my people, till their bitter end. From their closet, I watch the father sleep. The door was left cracked open this morning. He disgusts me. He is by no means a pleasant person. His flesh is coated in filth, and he only bathes when forced by the wife. I find myself all too often eagerly awaiting his departure to work. Ever since he changed his schedule to a later shift, I have found my routine shattered. Oh, how I miss the days when he would be out the door before his wife rose, so that I would have her all to myself. How I could be there for the child and admire the beauty in his ignorance. Now, I'm afraid I must tiptoe from the morning to the afternoon. My time alone with the woman is no longer so. Yes, I can watch her from the mirrors, brush against her as she sinks into the couch, but no longer do I possess the luxury of freedom. The father will leave shortly before the boy returns, and with this, I find solace. The sun will begin to dip below the horizon while he slaves away the hours at his job. As night dominates the sky, I can move as I wish, inside and outside of my home. Well, I used to go outside. Lately, I have noticed prying eyes gazing at my family from the windows, concealed by darkness. I am tempted to get rid of them, but I don't know how many wait, and I can't risk leaving my people exposed. My kind grows very envious of those of us with homes and families of our own. They seek to destroy our success and ruin everything we worked so hard to accomplish. I've found myself staring out the window, watching its shadows jump from streetlight to streetlight, contemplating if the less fortunate can be of use to me. I may have a decision soon. Perhaps tomorrow night I can have a chat with the little one. They call today Saturday, and I share mixed feelings for this one. I have my humans all day, but this also means the foul one lounges on the couch, shoveling filth down his gullet and barking at my people like a savage beast. Today was a true test of my self-control. Today he hit my boy. The little one was running around, talking about his school week and what simple things his brain consumed. He was so excited. I was so excited. I wanted to embrace him and share my pride, but to do so would be disastrous for us both. I watched as he spread his joy across the house, but anxiety and fear grabbed hold of me when he approached his father. I could see what was going to happen as the boy tugged on his father's sleeve and talked louder than the television in feeble hopes of gaining his parents' attention. I saw the disdain on the large one's face. I felt the rumble of his growl as the boy continued. My claws dug into my hands as I waited, helplessly. Then it happened. He struck my boy while shouting profanity. The child ran to his room, holding back tears, refusing to show his pain. I was conflicted by the need to follow him and the need to get this beast and hang him by his entrails. Saturday is the day I decided he had to go. Night fell quickly, and once they were in their beds, I sneaked outside. I could see the hungry eyes staring from the bushes, trees, rooftops. They were so eager to claim my home. I only need one of you, I snarled, my well-fed form towering over the lesser creatures of the night. I am looking for a little lust, I called out, and not a moment later, several starved demons scurried before me. They snapped and slashed at one another, until I snatched a smaller one up and held it by its leathery tail. The others quickly disappeared into the night. I have a deal to make with you. My voice rumbled in dominance at the tiny creature that stared fearfully into my massive eyes. I will share my wealth with you in exchange for the removal of the alpha male in this home. I need it done discreetly, and I grow angrier every day I can't maim or massacre him. Will you assist me? I asked it, giving not a hint of room for refusal. The creature seemed compliant, so I closed my hands over it and returned to the safety of my home. I scaled the stairs in strides and soon was looking down the gaping maw of the monster, snoring away beside the beautiful woman I cared so much for. Once more I held my new weapon by its tail and dropped it into the man's mouth. It slid effortlessly down his throat without invoking so much as a stir in his sleep. It was the perfect match. I felt better. As the days went by, the father grew more distant from his family. He earned a promotion at work, had increased hours, and was often away on business. My life was improving exponentially, but this was only the beginning. Peacefully, I watched my boy sleep. I wanted to move in closer, but if I did, he wouldn't be the same. As I lost myself in happy thoughts, they were interrupted by shouting in the parents' room. The father came home intoxicated tonight. This isn't a strange occurrence, but he slipped up. The father was supposed to be on a business trip this weekend. Not only was he home a day early, but there was lipstick on his neck. My heart swelled with joy as the wife began striking him with a lamp and driving him out of the house. She found the strength to get rid of that dead weight, and I was so proud of her for that. We were finally all going to be one big happy family. My family has been doing well, but things have changed. They seem complacent, they seem content with their lives and genuinely happy. I want to be happy for them, but I feel strange. When the father was around, I was so upset, so disturbed, but I was powerful and a force to be reckoned with. The mother has taken to new habits. She admits when she is wrong. She replaces punishment with a teachable moment. She has become so humble. Yet they are so happy. Why can't I be? I feel so weak. I feel sick, and I think I have been losing weight. I hadn't thought about what I was doing, and now I am going to die for it. They will never know I existed. They will not miss me, and I will rot away in the shadows. I only hope the boy can fight off the demons that will nest and make this their home. He will have to forgive his father or invite in wrath. He must stay active in school and avoid sloth. He cannot fall to the influences that consumed his father. I hope that the mother will stay strong as well and look out for him. When lust took their father, she didn't have to deal with the abuse any longer. She could move on and be content. She didn't have to be proud anymore, but I will always be proud.